Surely many people have dreamed of becoming a famous blogger overnight. After all, sometimes it takes just one viral video to launch a career promising fame and fortune. But what if that dream actually turns into a nightmare? A nightmare where you're held captive and forced to perform in front of a camera day and night. This nightmare became a reality for 22-year-old Chen Xiaofeng. Her dance video went viral on the Chinese version of TikTok, and after posting a few more videos over 2 months, she gained 400,000 followers. But the girl herself was far from thrilled about her newfound popularity, because all her actions were controlled by a real puppeteer. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Douyin is the Chinese version of TikTok, a social media platform for sharing short videos and hosting live streams. Douyin was launched in 2016 and quickly became one of the largest social networks in China, with nearly 750 million registered users, most of whom are between 18 and 35 years old. The profiles of bloggers popular in Chinese cyberspace rarely have followers outside the country. The app offers professional video content tailored to users' interests across various genres, including beauty, sports, and science. Like any social network, Douyin provides the opportunity to record and share important life moments. Learn various skills from professionals, such as cooking, dancing, foreign languages, and drawing. Enhance videos with creative tools like filters and stickers. You can find all kinds of content there. Popular bloggers earn huge sums of money on the platform through views and brand deals. Anyone can publish content, but whether it will resonate with the audience and turn a novice blogger into a star, only time will tell. In the summer of 2018, a new user who had only recently started posting their own videos suddenly woke up famous. Their video went viral, and the account quickly gained popularity. Each new video hit the trends and added more followers. The author and main star of these videos was a 22-year-old dance teacher named Chen Xiaofeng. Xiaofeng was born in 1996 and grew up in a coastal town on the outskirts of China, near the city of Qixi. Her childhood was spent in the company of her older brother. Their family was quite well off. Her parents owned a factory. So Xiaofeng grew up in a nurturing atmosphere of love and prosperity. The girl was very kind, gentle, and soft-spoken. She loved animals and treated people with respect. In Chinese culture, there is a tradition of giving children names that carry specific meanings. Most often, the name reflects wishes for longevity, wealth, a successful career, family happiness, or the affirmation of moral values. That's why Xiaofeng's parents gave their daughter a name meaning success and mastery, and the girl embodied her name through her passion for dance. At 7 years old, Xiaofeng studied various dance styles, participated in competitions, and won awards. She was a brilliant dancer. During classes, the girl often helped younger children master complex techniques or learn new moves. She found joy in watching these tiny humans improve their dancing week by week. Even as a child herself, Xiaofeng decided that one day she would become a teacher and pass on her skills to children. After finishing school, she pursued her childhood dream and became a kindergarten teacher. After working in that role for a year, the girl decided to return to dancing and try to build a career in that direction. At 19, Chen earned a dance instructor qualification and fully dedicated herself to her beloved craft. Soon after graduating from university, she started working with preschool-aged children, around 4-5 years old. Xiaofeng was one of those people born to work with little ones. Her calm, patient demeanor made dance classes special. Her students adored her and eagerly attended lessons. Around this time, her parents gave their daughter an apartment in Qixi, close to her workplace, so Xiaofeng wouldn't have to spend time commuting, as well as a Mercedes-Benz car. Her salary at the new job also increased slightly, but this mattered little to the girl. The financial aspect of life didn't concern her because she never relied on luxury or fashion trends. Chen and Xiaofeng's parents planned for their daughter to eventually marry. They didn't have high demands for their future son-in-law. The main thing was that he had a good character and treated his young wife with love and respect. After all, the Chen family was wealthy and could easily secure their children's future. Xiaofeng's father had planned from the start that after his daughter married, he would help the young couple buy equipment to start their own factory, ensuring they had enough money for food and clothing. In 2017, during a dance rehearsal while Chen Xiaofeng was changing, one of her colleagues noticed a tattoo on the girl's back depicting a small kitten, a puppy, and 2 names. The dance school instructor immediately guessed the meaning of the drawing. When Xiaofeng was asked about romantic relationships, she smiled shyly and nodded, confirming that she had indeed found a boyfriend. His name was Wei Dun, and he was 26 years old. Wei Dun was 5 years older than Xiaofeng. They met while attending a vocational school. Because of her striking appearance, the girl always had plenty of admirers. Very polite, quiet, gentle, and beautiful, especially in dance. Xiaofeng was like a dazzling, unattainable star. Young men didn't spark much interest in the girl because she was consumed by dance. At least, that was the case until she met Wei Dun. Her relationship with him was Xiaofeng's first experience with love and partnership. Rarely does first love become the only one, because lovers are often caught up in their dreams and fail to notice many things about their partner. It's as if they're wearing rose-colored glasses, seeing everything in a different light. That's roughly what Chen Xiaofeng felt when she started dating Wei Dun. The young man was also born and raised in Qixi, but his parents spent the entire year beekeeping in Inner Mongolia. This is an autonomous region in northern China, bordering Mongolia and Russia. Due to the constant absence of his father and mother, Wei Dun was raised by his grandmother from childhood. In vocational school, the guy trained as a chef, but after finishing his studies, he didn't pursue his culinary skills and instead got a job as a clothing salesman. He spotted the charming Xiaofeng in a bar and from that moment did everything to win her attention. The girl's friends couldn't understand what she saw in this ordinary guy. Chen had so many suitors that she could have chosen anyone, but for some reason, her gaze settled on this particular person. The word that could describe Wei Dun was slacker. Deep down, the guy hated the very idea of working. He was too proud to obey anyone or toil for someone else. Interestingly, his name meant reaping benefits and always having a roof over his head. Since he had no particular skills or entrepreneurial streak, Wei Dun simply refused to do anything. He told his beloved that he had his own clothing line and spent hours talking about business. Apparently, his time as a salesman in a store wasn't for nothing. Meanwhile, as he won Chen Xiaofeng's heart, he showered her with gifts and compliments. He cooked delicious lunches and served them like in a fancy restaurant. He took her on romantic trips and arranged incredible dates. Somehow, he found the money for it all, despite not having a job. The girl, inexperienced in romantic matters, was surrounded with such care and love that her heart melted, and worse, she became emotionally dependent on her boyfriend. This is called love bombing, a manipulative technique that involves rapid, intense seduction. The goal of this approach is to lower the partner's guard, gain their affection and complete trust, and establish control over the relationship. Often, people who use manipulation early in a relationship may drop their masks once they've secured reciprocated love. By then, the ordinary partner is already too deeply attached to their significant other and unable to break off the relationship. People get married, have children, and often it's too late to change anything. They suffer their whole lives and genuinely don't understand what happened to their partner, why they suddenly changed so much. Love bombing eventually ends, and the ideal image of a prince on a white horse vanishes. That's what happened with Wei Dun. Chen Xiaofeng began to notice negative traits in her once perfect partner, whom she had considered ideal not long ago. First, the man started getting extremely jealous. He absolutely had to know where she spent her time, what she was doing, and who she was meeting. If the answer didn't satisfy him or the girl didn't respond quickly enough, it triggered a full-blown scandal, loud shouting, and serious arguments. While Xiaofeng worked a full-time job, her partner spent days on end lounging on the couch in her apartment. Of course, Chen didn't like this, and she was embarrassed to tell her friends and acquaintances that Wei Dun didn't work anywhere. She hid the fact that she had a boyfriend from her parents entirely. Xiaofeng knew her mother and father wouldn't approve of such a man, so she kept her relationship a secret. She wanted to introduce her boyfriend to her family only after he found a stable job. One day in August 2017, just a few months after their relationship began, Chen Xiaofeng went to work as usual. Wei Dun stayed in the apartment. That day, the girl's parents went to a doctor's appointment at a city hospital in Qixi. After the visit, they decided to drop by their daughter's place unannounced. It was already 10 a.m., so the mother and father were very surprised when a sleepy young man appeared in the doorway of their daughter's bedroom. They guessed that Xiaofeng had a boyfriend and, to avoid embarrassing him, settled in the living room to give him time to get ready. But Wei Dun had no intention of meeting his potential in-laws. He slammed the bedroom door, collapsed back into bed, and slept for another couple of hours. The young man didn't even try to make a good impression on his girlfriend's parents. Naturally, Xiaofeng's father and mother immediately formed a poor opinion of this man. Instead of coming out to greet them, he simply ignored their arrival. But despite the awkward atmosphere of the first meeting between the parents and their daughter's potential fiancé, they waited for Xiaofeng and told her they would support any choice she made as long as she was happy. Surprisingly, the guy himself was eager for his girlfriend to impress his own parents. In early 2018, Wei Dun's parents returned from Inner Mongolia to Qixi to celebrate the Lunar New Year. The young couple went to visit them. Wei Dun was very proud of his girlfriend, though deep down he knew perfectly well he didn't deserve her affection. Still, he wanted Xiaofeng to make a good impression on his father and mother. The quiet, modest girl immediately won over the guy's parents. They even gave her a red envelope with money containing 10,000 yuan for the new year. Such envelopes were given by the older generation to the younger. It symbolized good wishes, success, and luck in the coming year. It was believed that the more money, the greater the good wishes. For Wei Dun's father and mother, this was a significant sum. But they, in turn, also wanted to impress the girl, realizing their son was very lucky with his choice. Now that the young couple had more or less met both sets of parents, their relationship should have, in theory, moved to a new level. But gradually, more and more conflicts arose in the pair. After the honeymoon phase, Chen Xiaofeng slowly began to discover the extremely cruel side of Wei Dun's personality. One day in February 2018, the couple argued first thing in the morning. It happened as the girl was getting ready for work. The ensuing scandal nearly made her late for classes. Grabbing her bag and car keys, Xiaofeng slammed the door and hurried to the dance school. But as soon as she turned onto the next street, out of nowhere, Wei Dun ran into the middle of the road and forced her to stop. It turned out he was furious because his girlfriend hadn't listened to him fully. He had bolted out of the apartment after her and cut her off, taking a shortcut. Wei Dun decided to continue the argument right there on the street. When Xiaofeng explained that she was late for work, he snatched her phone, took her car keys, and went home. The girl sat in the car, not knowing what to do. She couldn't drive away, nor could she leave the car unlocked. She had no phone to call the dance studio and warn them about her delay. Chen just sobbed. Eventually, she got out of the car and started stopping passers-by, asking to use their phones. Xiaofeng called her brother, who came and quickly sorted out the situation. That's how Wei Dun first met his girlfriend's older brother. Xiaofeng had never told her family about her boyfriend's erratic behavior, fearing her parents would worry. But this incident made the Chen family feel that Wei Dun was unreliable and hardly suited to be the husband of their beloved daughter. They drew their conclusions, but allowed Xiaofeng to make her own decision. Later that night, after the argument, the girl tried to break up with her boyfriend and even asked him to leave. But Wei Dun had no intention of letting go of such a prize and bombarded Chen's phone with audio and video messages, tearfully begging her to take him back. He said he couldn't live without her. He pleaded for forgiveness and berated himself harshly for treating his beloved so poorly. In reality, these were just manipulations. Wei Dun was trying to play on pity and do whatever it took to win Xiaofeng back, insisting that his life would be ruined without her. He sent her flowers and showered her with gifts, pulling her thoughts back to the early days of their romance. It's worth remembering that this was the girl's first serious relationship, and she had nothing to compare it to, so Xiaofeng entertained the idea that such things happen in loving relationships. Wei Dun was older and more experienced. He easily found arguments in his favor. In the end, Chen forgave him, took him back, and their relationship resumed. But a few weeks later, it all started again. One day in April, Xiaofeng's school was hosting a dance competition. Early in the morning, as she was getting ready for work, Wei Dun insisted on going with her. Without explaining his strange behavior, the young man simply got into the girl's car. On the way, they argued, as usual. All their fights stemmed from the same reasons. Wei Dun didn't like that Xiaofeng wasn't financially dependent on him. Of course, this was absurd since he didn't work anywhere and couldn't actually support the girl, but he usually masked his frustrations with feigned jealousy. He strictly forbade his girlfriend from talking to other men, though Chen never gave him any reason to doubt her loyalty. Wei Dun was unhealthily obsessed with his girlfriend, and his decision to go with her to work only confirmed his desire to control everything. While Xiaofeng went to help the kids prepare for their performance, Wei Dun was supposed to wait in the car. However, when she returned, the girl didn't find her boyfriend there. Instead, the front bumper and the dashboard display of her Mercedes were smashed to pieces. The car repair cost her a pretty penny. Xiaofeng got home closer to evening. Wei Dun wasn't in the apartment, so she locked the doors, had dinner, and went to bed peacefully. But around midnight, she was woken by dull thuds. The girl didn't want to start a scene in the middle of the night, so she refused to let him in. This infuriated the man so much that he started kicking the door. Xiaofeng was terrified. She called her brother and complained that Wei Dun was trying to break into her apartment by force. When her alarmed brother rushed to save his sister, the cowardly boyfriend had already vanished. This situation further turned the girl's relatives against her boyfriend. They understood that nothing good would come of this. Now the family insisted that Chen needed to break up with this guy and move on. In fact, Xiaofeng's grandparents even visited a fortune teller to learn the future of this couple. The clairvoyant warned that the young couple shouldn't stay together and needed to part ways as soon as possible. The girl's relatives sincerely hoped her romance would end soon, and the wishes of Chen's loved ones would come true, just not in the way they had hoped. Xiaofeng felt that the breakup would be painful and drawn out. Nevertheless, she decided to end the relationship a second time. But as soon as she slipped out of his control, Wei Dun resorted to his manipulations. He started sobbing on camera, getting down on his knees, and saying that Xiaofeng was the love of his life. He couldn't live a single day without her. Astonishingly, it worked a second time. The compassionate Chen couldn't bear to see someone kneeling before her and forgave her boyfriend. Their relationship was like a roller coaster. Despite not working anywhere, Wei Dun often went off somewhere, and it wasn't the clothing line he had mentioned before. He was engaged in a completely different kind of business. In May 2018, Xiaofeng accidentally learned that her boyfriend was drowning in debt because of gambling. Gambling had become a real addiction for Wei Dun. Apparently, he believed that one day he'd win a big sum, and then he'd never have to work again. Often, people suffering from gambling addiction start lying, stealing money, and manipulating those around them just to feed their need for gambling. Wei Dun could hardly be called emotionally stable before, but with his gambling addiction and mounting debt, he was becoming completely unmanageable. In a fit of anger, Xiaofeng broke up with her boyfriend for the third time. She hoped she could end the relationship before the consequences of his gambling caught up with her, but it was already too late. This time, Wei Dun didn't beg or cry. He called a locksmith while Chen was away, broke into her apartment, and took most of her clothes and documents. As soon as Xiao Feng discovered the theft, she called the police. But once she learned that her ex-boyfriend was behind the burglary, the girl withdrew her statement and began to pity the person who had been by her side not long ago. Xiao Feng understood that the reason for his behavior lay in his unhealthy state and gambling addiction, and she didn't want to make things worse for him. No matter how angry she was at Wei Dun, seeing him behind bars was more than she could bear. Her big heart wouldn't allow her to put the guy in prison, even if it meant she suffered as a result. To make amends to his girlfriend, Wei Dun went and bought her a puppy she had long dreamed of. It sounds wonderful, but in reality, the arrival of the dog meant they were now even more tied to each other. Now they had a four-legged pet. It needed to be cared for, fed, and walked. They had to share responsibility. Over the course of a few months, from February to May, the couple broke up and got back together 3 times. With the arrival of the puppy, the two decided to start over once again. At the end of May, Wei Dun and Xiao Feng decided to go on a short romantic trip to Hangzhou to get away from people, relax, and take a boat ride on the lake. In Hangzhou, the couple went for a boat ride. At first, they just enjoyed drinks and food, admired the stunning views, and talked. Xiao Feng was in a great mood. At one point, the girl jumped up and started fooling around to the music playing in the background. As a dancer, Chen's movements were smooth and elegant. She had perfect control over her body. Wei Dun took out his phone and started filming his girlfriend's dance with the lake in the background. Then the young man simply uploaded the video to Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok. In record time, the clip went viral and racked up over 1.5 million likes. The combination of a trending sound, the beautiful lakeside setting, and Xiao Feng's spontaneity played a big role. She danced from the heart and had no intention of becoming famous. Chen didn't yet know that this video would mark the beginning of an entirely new nightmare. In reality, to truly captivate an audience, simple things are enough. Xiao Feng was an ordinary girl, but she suddenly became a social media star within a month. Following the likes came offers for brand collaborations and new financial opportunities. Wei Dun's eyes lit up with dollar signs. He planned to make money without doing anything himself. The account where the video was posted was registered in his name, and he had never shared anything there before. Over the course of a month, from May 26th to June 26th, Wei Dun forced Xiao Feng to film 59 different videos, all of which were uploaded to his account. He spent hours researching social media trends, looking for popular music and concepts, and pressured the girl to film, sign brand deals, and gain more followers. Constant posting led to the follower count growing to 400,000. However, Xiao Feng herself had no say in the matter. All brand deals were handled by Wei Dun in her name, and he received the payments on his card. No matter how hard Chen tried to distance herself from performing on camera, her boyfriend found the right words to convince her to record the next video. He insisted that they had to fulfill contract obligations. Xiao Feng made it clear to the guy that she didn't want fame. She wanted to live an ordinary life, teaching children to dance. But against her will, she had to play the part of a carefree girl, eager for new followers. Meanwhile, she didn't see any of the money. It was easier for Chen to give in to her boyfriend than to live in constant stress. However, despite all the perks, the couple's relationship kept deteriorating. If Wei Dun used to express his anger verbally, now he started damaging and breaking her things. It's possible he even raised his hand to her. Of course, Xiao Feng was afraid to tell her parents everything, so she confided in one of her friends. She felt depressed and said she no longer had the strength to stand up to Wei Dun. No matter how much the girl begged him to slow down and reduce the number of videos, the guy wouldn't listen. Her friend told her what Chen already knew. She called Xiao Feng a tool for making money and urged her to end all ties with her boyfriend. The friend's words gave Chen confidence, and she decided to put an end to it once and for all. The girl knew a direct breakup wouldn't work, because then Wei Dun would lose his source of income and might act unpredictably. At first, she tried to simply distance herself from him, finding reasons to spend less time at home, citing constant busyness at the dance school, but it didn't work. On the night of June 20th, 2018, Xiaofeng and Wei Dun argued again. While the girl was asleep, her boyfriend took her phone and transferred 10,000 yuan from her bank account to himself. Earlier, the young man had demanded the red envelope with 10,000 yuan that his parents had given her for the Chinese New Year. He had already spent that money long ago, but pretended he hadn't touched it. When Chen woke up the next morning and realized her own boyfriend had robbed her, she was beside herself with rage. Xiaofeng even tried to kick him out of her apartment, but of course he refused to leave. During the scuffle, Wei Dun completely broke down the apartment door, leaving the girl unable to go to work. Left without a door, Xiaofeng called her family in tears, begging for help. When her brother arrived, Wei Dun immediately fled. For her parents, this situation was the final straw. They desperately wanted to protect their daughter from this man, but knew that Chen was an adult and would want to stay in the city. However, her father and mother had an ace up their sleeve. Officially, the apartment belonged to them. The parents came up with a plan, telling their daughter they wanted to sell the property, so she'd have to move back home and live with them for a while until they found her a new place. At the end of June 2018, Xiaofeng moved to her family's home in her hometown, where she was completely safe. Her brother immediately replaced all the locks on her apartment doors. A week later, her parents actually sold the property. Xiaofeng officially told her boyfriend they were done. She changed her phone number and blocked him on all messengers. But Wei Dun wasn't about to lose a lucrative income because of his ex-girlfriend's whims. He started stalking Chen everywhere and tried contacting her from other numbers. When that didn't work, he resorted to a forbidden tactic. After hundreds of ignored calls, Wei Dun sent Xiaofeng a video of him abusing the puppy he had bought her as an apology gift. In the video, the guy held the dog, dangling it on a leash over an open window. He said that if Chen refused to talk to him, she'd see her pet die. Naturally, this was a blow to Xiaofeng. The girl's kind heart couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to the dog. She rushed to Wei Dun and bought the puppy back from him for nearly 3,000 yuan, even though the animal had been given to her as an apology. After rescuing the pet, Xiaofeng tried to sever all possible ties with this man. She didn't want him to have even the smallest reason to contact her. The girl withdrew 10,000 yuan from her account, put the money in an envelope, and returned it to Wei Dun's parents. Though they refused to take the gift back, Chen passed the money through relatives. However, the young man didn't stop and kept looking for ways to meet her. From the messages Wei Dun sent to Chen Xiaofeng, it was clear how his mood swung. Sometimes he professed his love for her, and other times he threatened to take her life. One day, the ex-boyfriend tracked his girlfriend down when she went to a park to meet a friend. Wei Dun hid behind trees and watched Xiaofeng. When he saw another man next to her, he jumped out of his hiding spot and started a fight. At one point, Wei Dun pulled out a knife and was about to use it when Chen's piercing scream drew the attention of other park visitors. Afraid of the police, the guy dropped the weapon and fled into the trees. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt that evening. Until that moment, Xiaofeng hadn't told anyone much about her ex-boyfriend's aggressive and cruel nature. But now, there was a witness to Wei Dun's unhinged behavior. And the friend wasn't going to stay silent. He escorted Chen home and told her parents just how dangerous this man really was. The family was in shock. They knew Wei Dun was rude and volatile, but they had no idea he could attack someone with a knife in broad daylight. Her mother and father couldn't understand how the guy managed to track Xiaofeng down, given that she had blocked his number everywhere. They even considered the possibility that Wei Dun might have put a tracker on their daughter's car. Worried for her safety, her parents asked the girl not to go out alone for a while. They promised to pick her up from work and accompany her on errands. It was a wild situation. Chen just wanted to end the relationship, which was her full right. and she shouldn't have had to fear for her life. Over the next few days, Wei Dun kept sending the girl videos of him kneeling and begging her to forgive him. When he got no response, he started asking for one last meeting. He cried, complaining about how bad things were without her. But Chen ignored all his messages. Then the tone of his messages changed sharply. The guy switched to threats and intimidation. In reality, receiving such messages wasn't new for Qiaofeng. She had dealt with them throughout their entire relationship. For the last 6 months, she had endured similar verbal abuse. But by this point, she had stopped reacting to Wei Dun's hateful messages. On August 1st, 2018, Qiaofeng woke up and, as usual, saw a bunch of messages from her ex-boyfriend. She didn't do anything, just left them unanswered. After the park incident, Chen's mother was worried about her daughter's safety, so she didn't let her drive and personally took her to work and back every day. That day, Qiaofeng texted her mom that she was going to the movies with friends that evening, so there was no need to pick her up. The woman advised her daughter to be careful. In turn, the girl assured her everything would be fine. The mother didn't yet know these would be her last messages from Qiaofeng. Around 8 in the evening, Chen finished her classes at the dance school, stepped outside, and immediately got into her friend's car, unaware that Wei Dun was watching her from his own vehicle. As the girls pulled into the shopping mall parking lot, Qiaofeng noticed she was being followed and recognized her ex-boyfriend's car. At that moment, fear gripped her body. Chen wasn't just scared for her own safety. She was well aware she was putting her friend in danger. She didn't want anyone else to get hurt because of her, so without saying a word, she jumped out of the car and ran as fast as she could to a nearby business district, usually crowded with people. The girl hoped that with so many witnesses around, the guy wouldn't harm her. Meanwhile, Wei Dun, realizing Qiaofeng had foiled his plans, grew even angrier. He leaped out of his car and chased after her. But no matter how furious the young man was, he didn't forget to put a mask over his face, not wanting people to see him. Wei Dun ran until he finally caught up with Qiaofeng, then grabbed her by the arm and dragged her into an empty arcade. Pinning her in a corner between gaming machines, he grabbed her by the throat and pulled a serrated knife from his pocket. The girl begged for help, realizing the guy was about to hurt her, but her screams were drowned out by the melody of a gaming machine filled with cute toys. Holding his girlfriend with one hand, Wei Dun stabbed the knife into her stomach with the other, twisting the blade in a circle before pulling it out. He repeated these movements over and over. When Qiaofeng stopped resisting and fell forward, he didn't stop, continuing to strike her neck. The arcade owner saw the fight and tried to intervene but nearly got stabbed himself. The man managed to dodge, grabbed a mop, and hit Wei Dun with all his strength. After that, the guy hurried to flee the scene. In total, the entire attack lasted 3 minutes. Those were the final 3 minutes of Chen Qiaofeng's life. She was only 22 years old. A beautiful, kind, and modest dance teacher who dedicated her life to teaching children was publicly killed by an obsessive, controlling, and cruel boyfriend who refused to accept the end of their relationship. When emergency services arrived at the scene, a crowd of onlookers had already gathered near the arcade. Qiaofeng had deliberately run to this busy part of the city, hoping Wei Dun wouldn't do anything in front of witnesses. But the bystander effect kicked in. Instead of helping, people just stood and watched, like spectators at a performance unfolding right before them. The bystander effect, or the effect of the onlooker. This is a psychological phenomenon where people witnessing an emergency don't try to help the victim. It's been established that the more bystanders there are, the less likely any one of them will help, because the responsibility for what's happening is, as it were, shared among many people. In other words, each bystander thinks someone else should help the victim, not them. Conversely, in a situation where there's no one else to help, a person acts far more decisively, and this isn't an isolated case. For example, in 2020, in a busy London Underground train, a girl was harassed by a complete stranger in front of an entire carriage, and no one came to her aid. Worst of all, people recognized Chen Xiaofeng as the dancer from viral videos they'd seen in their news feeds. Many even tried to record videos on their phones at the moment her ex-boyfriend was taking her life. The girl didn't want loud fame in life, but she got it even after her death. She was forced to live and die online. The autopsy showed that Xiaofeng had been stabbed 16 times in total. And these weren't just cuts. The wounds were deep, triangular gashes, and the attacker's goal was to inflict as much damage as possible. At 9:30 p.m. that same evening, Wei Dun turned himself into the police. He thought confessing would lessen his punishment for the crime. When Xiaofeng's family went through her belongings, they found that on the bank card of a girl who earned over 10,000 yuan a month, less than 1 yuan remained. Chen was never extravagant, so it's likely Wei Dun swindled that money from her. After her parents unlocked their daughter's phone, they saw a slew of abusive text messages sent by her ex-boyfriend. Only then did they finally realize the extent of the terrifying threats and harassment their daughter had faced over the last month and a half. But the worst was the opinion of internet users. After looking into the situation, people began blaming Xiaofeng. Without any evidence, they claimed the girl had cheated on Wei Dun, that Chen was greedy for money and called her a gold digger. Meanwhile, the criminal was portrayed as just a lovesick man who snapped. Many couldn't even entertain the idea that a beautiful young woman could earn money and pay her bills on her own without relying on a man. The video of Xiaofeng simply dancing was equated to something akin to adult content. But what else can you expect from people who are only capable of typing negative comments online while hiding behind fake accounts? Incidentally, this was exactly why Chen didn't want to become famous, to avoid negativity from viewers. She taught dance to children and didn't want to ruin her reputation. One wrong move could completely destroy the life she had so carefully built for herself. But Wei Dun didn't care. He was only drawn to the prospect of making easy money. The most upsetting part of this whole situation was that Wei Dun's family started spreading lies around the city and even online, calling Xiaofeng a greedy person. They insisted that when the relationship ended, the girl refused to return the money their son's parents had given her for the new year, that she used their son and then broke his heart by ending things. Chen Xiaofeng's name was dragged through the mud, knowing she couldn't refute these rumors. But the girl's family stood up for her. They made posters in support of the deceased, took to the streets, posted photos on social media, and spoke about her in live streams, desperately wanting to put an end to all these dirty accusations against Xiaofeng. The false rumors only stopped when the police released details of the case and people finally saw the truth. On April 3, 2019, 8 months after Chen Xiaofeng's death, the first court hearing in the case took place. Wei Dun claimed he hadn't intended to take the girl's life, only to scare her with the knife so she would talk to him. However, this only made things worse. When she saw the knife, Xiaofeng started screaming and calling for help. Wei Dun tried to silence her and plunge the blade into her body, and then his mind went blank. The defendant also stated that none of this would have happened if Xiaofeng's mother had picked her up from work, as she had been doing recently. Essentially, the guy blamed the mother for her daughter's death. The woman couldn't bear such audacity and fainted right in the courtroom. Likely, the mother already blamed herself, so Wei Dun's words hit her hard. No matter how the young man tried to twist the situation in his favor, no one believed his nonsense. The entire courtroom was on the victim's side. The court of first instance ruled that the defendant Wei Dun had planned the attack in advance. Though he turned himself in, confessing to the horrific crime, it wasn't enough to mitigate his punishment. Wei Dun was sentenced to death. The young man refused to accept the decision and filed an appeal. His family scrambled and provided a psychiatrist's note stating that after the breakup with Chen Xiaofeng, Wei Dun suffered from depression and a mental disorder. But the appeal was rejected, and the judge's verdict was upheld. On August 31, 2020, the sentence was carried out. That same evening, some of Wei Dun's friends and relatives gathered outside the Chen family's home. They shouted and cursed every family member, believing Xiaofeng was to blame for the guy's execution. This happened as Wei Dun's loved ones were leaving the prison where they had said their final goodbyes to him. They were so upset that they decided to shift the blame for his death onto the family of the victim, whose life he took in the most horrific way. It's hard for any parent to imagine saying goodbye to their child under such circumstances. But perhaps it's worth looking at the situation a bit more broadly. That evening, the tension outside the Chen family's home escalated so much that the police arrived, and they had to take away Wei Dun's father, who nearly committed a crime against the family of the victim who suffered at his son's hands. Wei Dun's final act in this world was to become an organ donor after his execution as an attempt to atone for his guilt. But judging by his behavior, it's unlikely the young man truly regretted what he did. This guy didn't even find the strength or courage to apologize to Xiaofeng's family. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. My home is my fortress, but no home is immune to uninvited guests. Constance Bennett stood in bewilderment, unable to reach her son Bruce by phone. The previous evening, the entire family had gathered at his house to celebrate 7-year-old Melissa's birthday. Could it be that everyone had overindulged in cake and ice cream yesterday and overslept for work today? The woman got into her car and drove to Bruce's house, where he had recently moved with his wife and 2 children. When Constance entered, she immediately saw her son's body sprawled on the floor, lying in a pool of blood. The first thing she noticed was that the young man's forehead was unnaturally caved in. In horror, the woman fell to her knees and screamed, "What happened?" fully aware that he wouldn't answer. Mrs. Bennett didn't yet know that she had lost not only her son that night. The city of Aurora, Colorado, is located at the foot of the legendary Rocky Mountains. Over the past 50 years, Aurora's population has nearly tripled. In the 1980s, about 160,000 people lived there, and one of Aurora's residents in 1984 was the Bennett family. 27-year-old Bruce Bennett, his 26-year-old wife Deborah, and their daughters, 7-year-old Melissa and 3-year-old Vanessa, lived in a quiet neighborhood in a cozy family home they had recently moved into. Bruce worked at a furniture store, and Deborah helped him. It was their family business. At the same time, the young man was studying at a local college to become an air traffic controller, hoping to land a job at the airport in the future. The couple bought a new house and continued to work diligently. Evenings were spent in a quiet family setting with their girls, and they generally tried to lead a calm, measured life without arguments or scandals. Everything was going well until one day both spouses, without any warning, simply didn't show up for work. On January 16, 1984, the furniture store where Bruce and Deborah worked never opened. This was more than strange because the previous evening, relatives had attended a party at the Bennett's home for Melissa's birthday. They all had a wonderful time and left around 9 p.m., as everyone had to get up early for work the next day, Monday. But now Bruce and Deborah didn't show up for work and weren't answering phone calls. Bruce's mother, Constance, unable to get a response, drove to their house and found the garage door wide open and the front door unlocked. Both cars were still in the driveway, meaning the couple hadn't gone anywhere. Constance entered the house, and that's when she discovered her son's body at the foot of the stairs. He was covered in blood, his forehead unnaturally caved in. The woman ran outside and immediately called the Aurora Police Department. Constance was so distraught that she couldn't immediately recall Bruce's home address, as the family had only recently moved into this house. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they discovered several more bodies. Bruce was found lying on his back with his feet toward the stairs, suggesting he had fallen from the top. The man had a blunt head injury and a deep cut on his throat. A bloody handprint was found on the wall. It was assumed that the attack on Bruce occurred while he was on the second floor near the stairs, as several balusters, the support posts of the railing, were broken during the fall. Bruce Bennett was dead. Investigators from the Aurora Police Department stated that as soon as they entered the house and climbed the blood-stained stairs, they immediately sensed the smell of fear permeating the home. The second floor resembled a bloody slaughterhouse. In the master bedroom, detectives found Deborah. She was lying curled up near the bed in a pool of her own blood. The woman was dressed in underwear. She had likely been dragged from the bed and struck multiple times on the head. Deborah's jaw was damaged and several teeth were missing. One of them was found on the other side of the room. All the drawers in the bedroom were pulled out or broken. Someone had clearly rummaged through their contents. However, this wasn't the last horrific scene in the house. The Bennetts had 2 daughters. When officers entered another bedroom, they found a bloody pile of bedding on the floor, and beneath it lay Melissa's body. Her skull was so badly crushed that brain matter was visible. The victim's arms were raised upward, with cuts resembling defensive wounds. The girl's pajamas were cut at the waist, her legs spread apart. This suggested that Melissa had been a victim of assault. In the same bedroom stood another small bed. The Bennett sisters slept in one room, and on this bed, between the mattress and the wall, lay Vanessa, covered in blood. Arriving paramedics confirmed 3 deaths. When one of the paramedics approached Vanessa, they noticed she was still breathing. Her plush teddy bear, which the girl had tried to shield herself with from the attacker, was splattered with blood. Fragments of the victim's teeth were found on it. 3-year-old Vanessa was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery and was placed in the intensive care unit. The bodies of the other Bennett family members were sent for autopsy to the Office of the Forensic Medical Examiner. Meanwhile, investigators photographed the crime scene, collected evidence, and tried to reconstruct the timeline of the perpetrator's actions. On the floor beneath 7-year-old Melissa's body, detectives found distinctive knife scratches, and on the carpet in the master bedroom where Deborah lay, they discovered a bloody outline of a tool resembling a hammer, but the hammer itself was nowhere to be found. In addition, experts found several fingerprints that could have belonged to the perpetrator. There were blood traces on the bedding and carpets, possibly not belonging to the victims. Specialists also detected traces of seminal fluid on Melissa's bedding. All of this was meticulously collected and sent to the laboratory. Of course, in the 1980s, DNA comparison was not yet a method of investigation, so the samples were simply preserved in hopes they might prove useful in the future when the perpetrator was caught. Outside the house, Deborah's purse, smeared with blood, was found discarded. A butcher knife was also found in the snow in the yard. This knife, it seemed, had been taken from the kitchen set in the Bennett's home. Detectives suggested it could have been a failed burglary, but Constance, Bruce's mother, said that at first glance nothing appeared to be missing from the house. Bruce's brothers contacted the investigator and reported that the perpetrator could have entered through the garage. The previous evening, as they were leaving the family party for Melissa's birthday, they noticed the garage door was open. One of the brothers even returned to the house and reminded Bruce to close the garage. Aurora residents, upon learning of an intruder's invasion into an ordinary family's home and the deaths of nearly all its members, began frantically buying locks, reinforcing garage doors, and purchasing not only weapons and knives, but also helmets, as people feared having their heads smashed while they slept. The autopsy revealed that the cause of Deborah Bennett's death was blunt force trauma to the head, while Bruce and Melissa died from craniocerebral injuries as well as stab wounds. Relatives and friends of the Bennett family were devastated by grief and prayed for Vanessa's survival, but the girl's chances of recovery were slim. The Bennetts had bought this house just 4 weeks earlier. They were good, decent people. Neighbors and those who knew the deceased couple had no idea who could have wanted to harm them. Meanwhile, little Vanessa was in the hospital in a coma. Her skull was fractured, her jaw was so shattered that bone fragments had lodged in her throat, and there were severe hematomas on her arms and legs. Due to the attack, the girl also had pelvic bone injuries. Sometime later, a miracle happened. 3-year-old Vanessa finally regained consciousness. She remembered almost nothing about what had happened to her. the girl was taken in by her grandparents, Bruce's parents, and she had to relearn how to walk and talk. Grandmother Constance told the girl that she had a mother, Deborah, a father, Bruce, and an older sister, Melissa. The only thing the woman kept from her granddaughter was what had actually happened to Vanessa's family. The girl remembered her home, but her brain had blocked out childhood memories of that horrific night, which greatly aided her rehabilitation. The Bennett family appealed to the public for help in finding the perpetrators. They shared what they had gone through, losing 3 loved ones at once. The police launched a large-scale investigation, but it led nowhere. There were no signs of a break-in or any other motive for the massacre of an entire family. However, this wasn't the only unsolved crime in Aurora. That same year, 1984, another couple was attacked in their home. Before we continue, support the channel by subscribing, liking this video, and writing your comment on this case after watching the video. Thank you. 12 days before nearly the entire Bennett family was found dead, on January 4th, a distressing call came into the 911 emergency service around 2:30 a.m. from the Haubenschild couple. Kimberly woke up to a loud noise and was shocked to see an unfamiliar figure with a hammer standing at the foot of the bed. The woman started calling for her husband, James, who was lying beside her, but he wouldn't wake up. At that moment, the intruder forcefully threw the hammer at Kimberly, striking her on the head, and ran out of the room. Fortunately, James came to and tried to chase the perpetrator. Kimberly, sitting on the bed, felt liquid running into her eyes. At that moment, she didn't realize it was blood. The woman grabbed the phone and called 911. When the police arrived, they found both spouses with blood streaming from their heads. They were immediately taken to the hospital. The man had a fractured skull and his wife had a concussion. At the crime scene, investigators found no signs of a break-in. However, the garage door was open, and the door leading from the garage to the house was unlocked. In the bedroom, detectives indeed found the weapon, a bloodied hammer, a crowbar, the kind many families typically kept in their homes for household tasks. No fingerprints were found on the tool, but they noticed tracks in the snow that led officers to a nearby house. Just to be safe, the police searched the neighbor's house and determined that the intruder had run through it and exited onto a busy street where his tracks were lost. Near the house, officers also found a woman's purse belonging to Kimberly Haubenschild, but nothing was missing from it. The contents were simply dumped out in the snow, though the attack initially appeared to be a burglary, but ultimately nothing was stolen. As soon as Kimberly and James received medical attention, investigators began questioning them about the nighttime attack. The man recounted that he couldn't sleep that evening. He was sitting in the kitchen, recording music onto cassettes. Around 2 a.m., he went to bed and fell asleep instantly. As it turned out, they had indeed forgotten to close the garage door that evening. James woke up to his wife screaming nearby. He didn't immediately understand what had happened. His head was pounding, and his arm was severely swollen. The man chased after the intruder but couldn't catch up because his vision suddenly blurred, and he fell. Later, he recalled that after the first blow, he tried to shield himself with his arm. This caused it to swell, and James passed out from the pain. Kimberly told law enforcement officers that the stranger was a fairly large man. She didn't see his face, but could make out the outline of his figure. The woman didn't believe the attack could have been carried out by the neighbor whose house the tracks led to. By the way, the intruder brought the hammer with him. The Haubenschields suspected he had been watching them for some time, as he attacked only after James went to bed. While the Aurora police were searching for the perpetrator, another crime occurred in the city. Late on the evening of January 9th or early morning of January 10th, 28-year-old Donna Dixon was attacked in her own home. This happened after the woman returned from work. She was a flight attendant. The next day, Donna had arranged to meet her boyfriend, Ron. Before heading home, she stopped by a grocery store and then pulled into her driveway to pick up the mail. Dixon drove her car into the garage where, it seems, an unknown assailant attacked her. None of the neighbors heard anything. Donna's boyfriend, Ron, arrived early in the morning and noticed strange brownish stains on the garage threshold. When he looked inside, he found his girlfriend lying on the floor in a pool of blood seeping from her head. The woman was still alive. Ron immediately called 911 and Donna was urgently taken to the hospital, but the man was asked to stay as the police suspected him of the attack. In the garage, next to Donna's car, detectives found a large pool of blood. There was also blood on the car seats and a hammer. Presumably the weapon used in the crime was lying on the floor. At the hospital, it was determined that Donna had been struck multiple times on the head and subjected to assault. Fortunately, the woman survived and recounted what happened. After Dixon drove into the garage and opened her car door, she was immediately hit in the temple with a hammer, which, as it later turned out, didn't belong to either her or Ron. The stranger then dragged Donna out of the car onto the garage floor, took advantage of her helplessness, and then fled, leaving her to die. The woman bled for several hours. Doctors told Donna that if it had been warm outside, she wouldn't have survived. The cold caused her blood to coagulate, delaying her death. Her boyfriend, Ron, slept at the foot of Donna's hospital bed with a gun he had recently purchased. The man feared the perpetrator would return to finish her off. Dixon survived, but she suffered memory loss, which prevented her from immediately recalling the details of the crime. From time to time, brief memories returned, but Donna was so disoriented that she couldn't piece them together. When investigators told the victim about another woman who was attacked on the same day, January 10, 1984, Dixon began to cry and couldn't stop. It was all so horrific that Donna genuinely didn't want to recall what she had been through. 50-year-old Patricia Smith was in a house in Lakewood, which she shared with her daughter Sherry and grandchildren. Lakewood was about a 30-minute drive from Aurora, Colorado. Patricia's daughter was going through a divorce, so her mother moved in to help with the children. Besides being a caring mother and grandmother, Smith was also a successful businesswoman. Patricia worked as an interior designer across the state. Every morning, she drove her daughter to a park, where Sherry caught a bus to work. In the evening, after finishing her tasks, the mother picked Sherry up at the parking lot. They collected the children from daycare together and drove home. On the evening of January 10, 1984, Sherry didn't see her mother. Patricia was never late. She knew she had to pick up the kids. So, when the woman didn't show up that day, Sherry immediately sensed something was wrong. In the end, another family member gave her a ride. They picked up the children, and when they returned home, they noticed the house was dark. Only the window of Patricia's upstairs bedroom was lit. Sherry didn't understand what was happening. She noticed the garage door was open, and her mother's car was still inside. Patricia had planned to run errands after dropping off her daughter, but apparently, she hadn't gone anywhere. When Sherry and the children entered the house, they immediately saw Patricia. The woman was lying on her back about 2 meters from the front entrance. Her face was covered with a children's blanket featuring Winnie the Pooh, and her arms were folded across her chest like those of the deceased. Her bra and shirt were pulled up, and her jeans were pulled down, yet Patricia was still wearing her boots. Sherry immediately realized her mother was gone. She quickly ushered the children outside and went with them to the neighbors to call emergency services. Arriving investigators suggested that as soon as Patricia entered the house, the perpetrator attacked her. The victim's belongings and purse were dumped on the floor. Nearby lay a bag of groceries. Among other items was a receipt for a fast food purchase at noon. This meant the woman's death likely occurred between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. The autopsy revealed that Patricia had been struck 17 times on the head with a blunt object, presumably a hammer. This was the cause of her death. Smith was also subjected to assault by the attacker. The police questioned Sherry about possible enemies her mother might have had who could have had a motive to do such a thing. The young woman gave the police 4 names of people from Patricia's hometown in Nebraska who might have had grievances against her mother. Detectives checked the suspects' alibis, and it turned out none of them had even left their state. So, for lack of evidence, Yet another attack remained unsolved. Although the Aurora Police Department suspected these crimes were somehow connected and strikingly similar, each case was assigned different detectives, and there was no collaboration between them until the bloody massacre of the Bennett family occurred. The Aurora community was in horror and disarray. The media even gave the perpetrator the nickname, the Hammer Killer. When investigators decided to link all these attacks together, the theory of a possible serial maniac emerged. The crime scenes in all cases had one common feature. They were all located near construction sites. So the perpetrator could have been a construction worker, which is why he used a hammer as a weapon. An FBI specialist was brought in to create a profile of the criminal attacking residential homes. According to the profiler, this person deliberately sought out open garages. If the door leading into the house was unlocked, he immediately began attacking the occupants. If a lock blocked his path, he simply moved on to search elsewhere. It didn't matter to him who he attacked. The perpetrator also robbed his victims, but took only inexpensive items or a few dollars in cash. He was sloppy and unsophisticated. Most likely, he was a white male in his 20s without a college education. The most alarming thing was that he would likely continue attacking until he was arrested or killed. The perpetrator likely had mental health issues but never sought treatment for them. The police tried to check construction workers who worked at sites near the attack locations. However, this proved difficult. Most construction companies lacked all the necessary employee documentation and identification. Investigators attempted to identify the perpetrator based on the FBI specialist's profile, but failed here as well. Ultimately, the blood on the carpet in the Bennett family's home was identified as type A, but this led nowhere. There was simply nothing to compare the blood type to. Detectives couldn't identify a single specific suspect. The survivors of the attacks among the victims had nearly lost hope that the perpetrator would ever be found. For many years, these cases remained unsolved. In the 2000s, the Colorado Police Department ordered a re-examination of the physical evidence from the Aurora attacks. An officer carrying out the task found something overlooked in the initial investigation. On 7-year-old Melissa Bennett's pajamas in the crotch area, a single hair was found. And years later, the police had a chance to extract a DNA profile. It was a risky process that could ultimately destroy the only real piece of evidence, but they took the risk. On March 1st, 2001, 17 years after the attacks and massacres in Aurora, the DNA from the crime scene at the Bennett family's home was entered into the FBI database. Unfortunately, no matches were found. But in 2002, an arrest warrant was issued for an unknown perpetrator based on the analysis of his DNA. It's considered the first arrest warrant issued in Colorado based solely on DNA without identifying the suspect's identity. In 2010, the Aurora police announced that DNA analysis officially linked the Bennett family case and the Patricia Smith case, though the perpetrator's identity still hadn't been established. Knowing that these crimes were almost certainly committed by the same person should have revitalized both investigations and given authorities new directions to pursue the culprit. And in 2016, using age-progressed DNA phenotyping, experts finally obtained an image of the possible suspect based on his DNA. One image showed what the perpetrator might have looked like in 1984, and the other showed what he might look like now. While the police tried to find the perpetrator, the surviving victims did their best to return their lives to normal. The Haubenschild couple, Kimberly and James, moved out of their home shortly after the attack. Every night, they listened for the slightest noise and eventually decided to change their place of residence. The husband and wife also couldn't be in public because they didn't know the attacker's face and feared he might be nearby, ready to finish what he started. The surviving flight attendant, Donna Dixon, had to undergo a long journey of recovery. Her boyfriend, Ron, was constantly by her side and upon completion of her treatment, proposed to her. Ron never lost faith that his girlfriend would recover and overcome this ordeal. Visiting her hospital room every day, he tried to make Donna laugh so she could forget her tragic experience and start enjoying life again. They later married. The sole survivor of the Bennett family, 3-year-old Vanessa, grew up, but her life changed drastically after the deaths of her parents and older sister. Although Vanessa didn't remember the details of that night, the metal plate in her forehead involuntarily reminded her of the most horrific day of her childhood. She still suffered from the attack's consequences, including paralysis of the left side of her body. Vanessa shared that, as a child, she couldn't understand why she was different from her peers. All the kids mocked her because of how she looked. She was constantly asked what happened to her face. The girl didn't know how to respond. This caused her to grow angry with her grandmother. Eventually, in high school, after an attempt to take her own life, Vanessa was sent to a boarding school. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder, ADHD, and bipolar disorder. Unable to cope with her issues, the girl began drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana, and at 19, she became pregnant. She gave birth successfully, but at 3 months, her child was taken away because Bennett couldn't care for him. It got to the point where Vanessa lived under a bridge for a time. She also ended up in jail multiple times for shoplifting and illegal possession of controlled substances. The sole survivor had said goodbye to her own life more than once. After all her loved ones were killed in one night by the hammer killer, the girl didn't value the chance she'd been given. Bennett simply couldn't handle the pain of losing her parents and didn't understand why she had to endure so much suffering. Her childhood trauma undermined not only her physical condition, but also shattered her psyche. All the victims spent much of their subsequent lives waiting for the police to catch the perpetrator. They all deserved justice after years spent in fear, and would only feel safe if the murderer was behind bars. In 2018, the police department held a press conference attended by detectives who had worked on the investigations of the residential attacks in Aurora over the years. Many of the officers had already retired, passing the cases to new personnel, and finally, a breakthrough occurred in the case. Specialists discovered a match with the perpetrator's DNA in the CODIS database. This is the national U.S. database that stores DNA profiles of convicted criminals, unsolved crime traces, and missing persons. The attacks on Aurora residents had haunted multiple generations of police officers who continued to search for the perpetrator year after year, someone who dared to raise a hand even against little girls. And now, the authorities had the name of a real person suspected of the massacres: Alexander Christopher Ewing. By that time, he was already in custody for another crime. Naturally, his guilt first had to be proven, but having the specific name of the perpetrator was a monumental breakthrough in the case. As it turned out, Alex Ewing was already serving a sentence in Nevada for an attack that occurred back in 1984. On August 9, 1984, this man entered the home of Chris and Nancy Barry in Henderson, Nevada. He attacked the couple while they were peacefully sleeping in their bed. The man used an axe handle as a weapon. The police found the couple in their bedroom with blood everywhere. Both of Nancy's arms were broken, and Chris was beaten unconscious. But both spouses clung to life because their young children were sleeping in another room. One was 2 years old, and the other had been born recently. When the police arrived, Nancy and Chris didn't know whether the attacker had left their home or was still somewhere nearby. The first thing the young parents asked the officers was whether their children were okay. Fortunately, both toddlers were sleeping soundly in their cribs. Nancy recounted hearing a strange noise in the middle of the night and going to investigate its source. In her own kitchen, she saw an unfamiliar man and ran back to the room where Chris was still sleeping. The intruder followed her and struck Nancy with the axe handle on her arms as she tried to reach for the phone, then turned on Chris. The woman pretended to be dead, and eventually, the perpetrator left the bedroom. The couple didn't know if he was still in the house. Chris was unconscious, and Nancy, with her broken arms, was too afraid to leave the bedroom. To the great relief of the parents, the toddlers were found alive and unharmed. While the Berries were taken to the hospital due to their injuries, relatives stayed with the children. The only evidence at the crime scene was footprints. The police printed a composite sketch of the attacker and canvassed neighboring homes, then deployed a helicopter. Detectives believed a fugitive convict might be involved. Eventually, the man was spotted at a payphone. He tried to flee, but, realizing the futility of his actions, Alex Ewing surrendered to the police. On February 28, 1985, a court found him guilty of attempting to take the lives of the Berry couple and sentenced him to 100 years in prison. Alex was indeed a fugitive criminal. Before the attack on Chris and Nancy, he had been in prison for another crime. On January 27, 1984, 11 days after the massacre of the Bennett family in Colorado, Ewing attacked a man named Roy Williams in Arizona. Williams woke up to a powerful blow to the head. Not understanding what was happening, Roy lifted his head and saw a stranger standing by the bed. The man asked the uninvited guest what he was doing there. Instead of answering, the intruder fled. He bolted through the back door and vanished into the darkness. Like the other attacks by the Hammer Killer, this one also occurred under the cover of night, so Roy couldn't describe the attacker. However, his shoe print was left in the snow in the yard. Investigators made a copy of the print and sent it to other agencies. 7 hours later, an officer driving along a local highway near Roy Williams's house noticed a hitchhiker on the roadside. The man was asked to show the sole of his shoe, and the print perfectly matched the attacker's footwear. Realizing he was about to be arrested, the stranger ran. Eventually, the hitchhiker was found hiding in the bushes. It was none other than Alex Ewing, who was just 23 years old at the time. He was charged with robbery and attempted murder of Roy Williams. The weapon this time was a large rock. Because the county jail was overcrowded at the time, Ewing was sent to a correctional facility out of state, where he remained for the next 9 months. On August 9, 1984, Alex, along with other inmates, was placed in a special van headed to Nevada. At a gas station, the van stopped, and the prisoners were allowed to use the restroom. Alex didn't return. He escaped. The police didn't realize how dangerous a convict they had let slip. The fugitive wasn't immediately found, though several reports came in from Henderson residents. One woman called 911 and reported that an unknown man had tried to break into her home. When he failed, he attempted to steal a parked car. The stranger matched Ewing's description. Another woman, in hysterics, called emergency services and reported that a man had entered their home while she and her husband were sleeping and began striking them with a club. The victim urged the dispatcher to hurry, as she didn't know if the perpetrator had left their home. This was the home of the Berry couple. In 1984, when Alex Ewing was arrested for the attack on Roy Williams and later for the attack on Nancy and Chris Berry, DNA comparison technology didn't exist, nor was there a CODIS database. It was established only in 1994, consolidating fragmented state and local DNA data into one main database. CODIS began fully functioning in 1998. DNA samples started being required from all arrestees, but the data of those already serving sentences weren't entered into the database until much later. Nevada state law began requiring DNA from individuals serving sentences for felony convictions around 2016. As soon as the Colorado police identified the Hammer Killer's name, they learned that Alex Ewing was scheduled for parole. The hearing on this matter was set for July 27, 2018, but fortunately, it was postponed, so investigators from Colorado urgently traveled to Nevada to question Ewing. Initially, the detectives didn't tell Alex why they had come, simply asking the inmate to talk about his life. That's how they learned that Ewing had been in Aurora for about a year, working at various construction sites, as mentioned in the FBI profile. Only then did they show him photographs of Patricia Smith and the deceased members of the Bennett family. The man jumped up and began shouting that it was a mistake, that he was seeing these people for the first time. At the time, Alex was 57 years old. His file noted that he had been charged with burglary in 1979 when he was about 17 years old. So, this man could be considered a fairly experienced criminal. In total, Alex Ewing attacked at least 6 homes, leaving behind bodies and ruining the lives of surviving victims. However, when it came time to press charges, it turned out that due to a 34-year statute of limitations, Ewing could no longer be tried for assault and causing serious bodily harm. The only option was to charge him with the murders of 4 people: 50-year-old Patricia Smith, 27-year-old Bruce, 26-year-old Deborah, and 7-year-old Melissa Bennett. Sometime later, Alex Ewing was extradited to Colorado, where he faced a jury trial. During the proceedings, it emerged that in 1984, the police, unaware of what they were doing, destroyed some of the evidence. The Aurora Police Department's investigations were deemed substandard. Most items the perpetrator touched in the house weren't actually tested for DNA, including the knife and the purse found in the yard in front of the house. Nevertheless, in 2021, Alexander Christopher Ewing was found guilty of the deaths of Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa Bennett and received 3 life sentences. In April 2022, he was found guilty of the murder of Patricia Smith and sentenced to an additional life term. Justice caught up with Ewing 37 years after he committed his crimes. During the reading of the first verdict, the man showed no emotion, expressed no remorse, and simply accepted it as inevitable. But during the second trial, the 61-year-old Alex claimed it was all a setup, that the crime had been pinned on him because someone needed to be blamed. In prison, Alex Ewing created an online dating profile, describing himself as a rugged outdoor enthusiast who enjoys camping, cars, animals, and old movies. He wrote that he's far from a saint and is looking for a woman around 50 who could be his good friend. And surely, there will be someone who actually wants to support this monster. The surviving Vanessa Bennett, upon learning that the perpetrator who sent her entire family to the grave would spend the rest of his days behind bars, took full responsibility for the choices she had made in life. Despite all the hardships she endured, the woman now looked to the future with optimism. She began treatment for her addictions and met her son for the first time since she was forced to give him up. And now they keep in touch. The little girl who couldn't cope with her childhood trauma grew into an adult woman. Vanessa is now clean and sober. She lives in Arizona with her second husband, and they have 2 daughters. Today, she is 43 years old. The physical injuries she sustained that night still cause her discomfort, while the emotional suffering has simply faded into the background over time. Although justice prevailed after so many years, Vanessa's life was shattered to its core. Only in her 40s did Bennett stop feeling like a victim and begin rebuilding her life brick by brick. Her dream is to write a book and help people struggling with addiction, just as she did. Writing helps her release the emotions she suppressed for many years. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. Savannah Anderson moved into a residential complex with round-the-clock security to feel safe. However, this did not stop an obsessive criminal driven by intimate fantasies. Sunny had been talking to her mother for about 2 hours, describing in detail the marriage proposal and how she envisioned the upcoming wedding. It had grown dark outside, and the clock struck midnight when the young woman hung up the phone. She drew the curtains, slipped off her robe, and headed to the bedroom. Soon, Savannah would be falling asleep in the arms of her future husband, as they had already set a date for the celebration. Lost in her dreams, the young woman opened the door to her room and saw the figure of a man, but it was not her fiancé. Today's story took place more than 4.5 decades ago, in the spring of 1979, in Irvine, a city located in Orange County, California, USA. The main character of the story is a 22-year-old woman named Savannah Lee Anderson. Friends and loved ones affectionately called her Sunny. Savannah was born on December 6, 1956, and was the only child of Elvin and Maxine Anderson. She had no siblings, and all of her parents' love and care was devoted entirely to her. The girl grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. There, Sunny had a best friend named Elaine, with whom she had been close since they were very young children. The two friends were so close that they considered themselves sisters. Savannah's childhood could be described as quite happy. She excelled in school, read a lot, and received an excellent upbringing. As she grew older, Sunny blossomed into an attractive young woman with a very high level of intelligence. She deeply valued her own moral principles, was compassionate but also very stubborn, and never allowed anyone to violate her personal boundaries. Her best friend Elaine described Savannah as someone ahead of her time, as she was wise and level-headed beyond her years. From a quiet schoolgirl, she grew into a very sweet, attractive young woman with golden blonde hair and a radiant smile. When Sunny turned 21, she decided to radically change her life, leave her family home, and move from Utah to California. Anderson wanted to become independent from her parents and achieve success in another state, in the city of Irvine. She relocated, found a job as a secretary at a company called Commercial Credit, and just 6 weeks before this incident, settled into a new residential complex called Woodbridge. It was a ground-floor apartment, and although Sunny lived alone, she immediately felt very comfortable there because the complex had round-the-clock security. This was very important for a young woman to feel safe. 3 months after moving to California, Savannah met a man named Bill Mills. Her new acquaintance was almost 10 years older than her, but despite the age difference, they got along wonderfully, quickly became enamored with each other, and started dating. Just 6 months after the start of their relationship, Bill proposed to Savannah, and she accepted. Although the couple had not been together for long, the man almost immediately realized that she was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Sunny was also thrilled about the engagement and was over the moon with happiness. But unfortunately, this joy for the newly engaged couple was short-lived. The day after their engagement, Savannah Anderson became the victim of a truly horrific crime. On May 13, 1979, Sunny spent the entire day with her boyfriend, now fiancé, Bill Mills. They had a wonderful time together, discussing the upcoming celebration, dreaming about the future, and sharing plans for their life. Later that evening, Bill left Savannah's apartment in Woodbridge. They agreed to meet again the next day and go somewhere to celebrate the engagement. However, the next day, May 14th, Sunny vanished. Bill called her home phone throughout the morning, but she didn't pick up. The man began to worry about his fiancée because it was unlike her to disappear without warning. Bill waited for Savannah to call back, but evening came, and there was still no word from her. The concerned fiancé went to the Woodbridge complex where his fiancée lived and started knocking on her apartment door, but again, there was no response. In fact, Mills was not the only one trying to locate Savannah. The manager of the company where she worked as a secretary also decided to visit his employee that evening. The reason was that Anderson had not shown up for work that day and hadn't even bothered to call and inform anyone of her absence. Her boss and colleagues were worried about Savannah because such behavior was out of character for her. Sunny was a responsible employee. For her to simply miss a shift, there had to be a significant reason. The manager called her phone several times in the morning and afternoon, but she didn't answer. That evening, he decided to stop by Anderson's home to check if everything was okay. While Bill was trying to reach his fiancée, Savannah's boss joined him, but there was still no response. Sunny didn't open the door, and there was a deathly silence inside, which was strange because the young woman's car was still parked in the complex lot, indicating she hadn't gone anywhere. Not knowing what else to do, Bill decided to call the police and ask them to conduct a welfare check on his fiancée. The call to the station was made around 7:30 p.m. The law enforcement officers who arrived soon after tried to obtain a spare key to Savannah's apartment, but there wasn't one in the complex's office, so the officers had to find another way to get inside. The police inspected the windows and noticed that one of them, located in the young woman's bedroom, was unlocked. An officer took advantage of this, pushed the window open, and climbed into the room. As soon as he did, a horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes. On the bed lay the body of 22-year-old Savannah Anderson, and she hadn't just died. She had been the victim of an incredibly brutal crime. Sunny had been killed in her own home, where she felt completely safe. The patrol called for backup, and soon detectives from the homicide division arrived at the residential complex. They immediately concluded that the young woman had been subjected to sexual assault. Anderson was found lying on her back with her legs spread apart. Later, the coroner confirmed this theory. The victim's body had already cooled and stiffened, meaning Sunny had been dead for several hours by this point. The perpetrator had wrapped her head in a towel before leaving the scene. When the towel was removed, it became immediately clear how severely the apartment's occupant had suffered. Her jaw was broken, her face was covered with numerous bruises and abrasions, and there was a ligature mark on her neck. The skin on Sunny's throat was also scratched, likely because she had resisted as the criminal deprived her of the ability to breathe, trying to free herself from the strangulation. There were also many defensive wounds on her body, indicating that Anderson had fought for her life. The subsequent autopsy established that Savannah had been struck on the head multiple times with a blunt object, possibly a baseball bat. The official cause of death was strangulation. At the crime scene, the police immediately noticed the absence of blood on the victim's body. There were enormous amounts of red stains all around. On the bed where Savannah lay, on the blanket covering her body, and blood splatter on the wall and the headboard of the bed. But the body itself was clean, with only bruises and scratches remaining. Soon, the police understood why this was the case. Smeared blood traces on the edges of the sink indicated that the perpetrator had dragged the young woman's body to the bathroom and washed off all possible evidence, then changed the bedsheet, dragged the lifeless body back to the bedroom, and performed a series of strange actions. He put a piece of jewelry, a watch, on Savannah. All the items were intact, so they had clearly been placed on the young woman after she was already dead. Given the brutality of the attack, the necklace and watch would have inevitably been damaged by the blows. All of the perpetrator's actions suggested a close acquaintance with Sunny, as if he had done something he suddenly felt ashamed of in her presence. That's why he cleaned the room, washed the blood off her body, covered her battered face with a towel, adorned her neck with an expensive necklace, and put a watch on her wrist, as if trying to apologize for his disrespectful actions toward her. The perpetrator knew Savannah and was angry with her for some reason, which is why he unleashed his rage on her body. The crime had personal motives and could have been committed out of passion. At the same time, there were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, so either the occupant had let this person in voluntarily, or he had entered through the unlocked bedroom window, as the police later did. The investigation into Savannah Anderson's violent death began with a review of the closest people in the young woman's circle. Naturally, the first person the police focused on was Sunny's partner and fiancé, Bill Mills, the one who raised the alarm when he couldn't reach his fiancée. Bill was brought to the police station for questioning. The man was clearly devastated by what had happened and assured the detectives that he had nothing to do with Savannah's death. Just 24 hours earlier, he had proposed to his girlfriend and felt like the happiest man in the world. They were making plans for the future and looking forward to the upcoming wedding. However, Mills did not have a solid alibi for the time of the young woman's death. Experts determined that Anderson had died shortly after midnight on May 14, 1979. Before that, she had been talking to her mother on the phone for about 2 hours. The young woman's mother told the detectives that her daughter was incredibly happy about her engagement to Bill and shared her wishes regarding the wedding. The investigators asked Mills where he was and what he was doing after the new day began. The man said he was at home in his apartment, but no one could confirm his statement. The police searched the grieving fiancé's apartment, but found nothing to suggest Mills was involved in the killing of his fiancée. To fully clear him of suspicion, the police asked the man to provide his fingerprints. At the crime scene, experts found several bloody fingerprints, obviously left by the perpetrator, on the bathroom door and the toilet tank lid. It was clear that the criminal had tried to clean up traces of his presence in the apartment as much as possible. But apparently, he didn't fully succeed in this task. It should be noted that this was 1979, and DNA analysis and forensic technologies were not yet used to identify suspects. The primary method of identifying a perpetrator was fingerprints. Bill Mills willingly agreed to the procedure, which cleared him of all suspicion. After that, the police took fingerprints from Savannah's boss, who had come to Anderson's apartment to check why the young woman hadn't shown up for work. But his fingerprints didn't match those found at the crime scene either. The manager was also ruled out as a suspect. Before we go any further, please support my channel. Put a like on the video and write in the comments from which city and state you are watching me. Thank you. The police questioned Savannah's neighbors, but, as is often the case, no one saw or heard anything. So, the next step in the investigation was to interview the security team at the Woodbridge residential complex. The guards were on duty around the clock and patrolled the area, so they might have noticed something suspicious. That night, 2 security guards were on duty, named Chuck Doyle and Robert, or Bob Sellers. They worked in shifts, so the police wanted to take statements from both men to get a fuller picture of what happened. The detectives first spoke with Chuck Doyle, whose shift started at midnight on May 14th. Chuck said he was slightly late for work and arrived at the complex around 12:10 or 12:15 a.m. He was supposed to take over from his colleague Bob Sellers, who had started his shift earlier that day on May 13th. Shortly after arriving, Chuck Doyle noticed that one window in Savannah's ground floor apartment was slightly open, as the curtains were billowing in the wind. The young woman herself was talking on the phone in another room. Doyle initially parked next to Sellers' car, but Bob wasn't in the vehicle, so Chuck drove around the complex, didn't find his partner, and waited for him in the parking lot. Sellers showed up only around 12:30 a.m. Bob had tossed his baseball cap and uniform shirt onto the back seat of his car and sat in the passenger seat of his colleague's vehicle. This seemed odd, but Doyle figured Robert was just hot. The weather in California was warm, and despite the late hour, it was stuffy outside. The guards chatted a bit about work. Sellers handed over the daily security report, got into his car, and drove home, while Doyle continued his shift. The man drove around the complex again, but didn't notice anything suspicious. Everything was quiet and calm. There were no strangers on the premises, and the residents had long been asleep in their apartments. Though later, Chuck Doyle admitted to the detectives that he might have missed something because he dozed off while sitting in his car. Of course, he wasn't allowed to sleep during his shift, and a guard was supposed to patrol the complex all night. But Doyle was exhausted from the day, and sleep overtook him. Chuck woke up around 2 a.m. when he was startled by the sound of a car door slamming. It turned out that his partner, Bob Sellers, had returned to the complex to invite Chuck Doyle to a local 24-hour diner for breakfast. The men went to the diner, ate, and then Doyle returned to Woodbridge. His shift ended at 6:30 a.m., so that was all he could tell the detectives. When asked by the police if the guard was personally acquainted with Savannah Anderson, Chuck answered affirmatively. Just a month before the tragedy, he had helped the young woman get into her own apartment. Sunny had accidentally locked herself out, leaving her keys inside. She turned to Chuck Doyle, who was on duty at the time, for help. The guard managed to get inside through a window since the apartment was on the ground floor. Doyle immediately warned the detectives that if they found his fingerprints on the window frames, they should know they were there long before the crime. Chuck's entire story seemed suspicious to the investigators. It contained several red flags. First, why did the guard immediately try to explain the possible presence of his fingerprints in the deceased young woman's apartment? Second, his tardiness to work and then sudden sleep also raised doubts about the truthfulness of his story. Could Doyle have been trying to cover up his crime this way? The detectives still had to figure this out. For now, They decided to talk to the second guard, 22-year-old Robert Sellers, to get his account of that night. And as the police soon discovered, Bob's story didn't quite match Chuck Doyle's. Sellers said his shift started around 4 p.m. on May 13, 1979, and was supposed to end at midnight. During his rounds of the premises, he also didn't see or hear anything suspicious. Bob confirmed that Doyle was a bit late that night, so he had to stay longer to avoid leaving the area unattended. Then Sellers returned to the complex's parking lot in the early morning to invite his colleague to breakfast together. However, unlike Doyle's story, Bob said this happened not at 2 a.m., but at 3:30 a.m. The second guard's story also didn't inspire confidence in the police. What was the point of returning to work a couple of hours later to have breakfast with a colleague? Bob Sellers had worked a full shift at the complex until late at night. Why not go home and sleep? Why did he leave and then return a couple of hours later to have breakfast in the middle of the night? These were the questions the detectives asked the guard. Sellers explained to the officers that, in addition to working as a security guard, he was enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps and had to report to a military base at 6 a.m. that day. Since he had stayed late after his shift, he decided there was no point in going to bed because he'd have to get up again in a few hours. Bob thought he could pass the time with an early breakfast at a diner in the company of his colleague, Chuck Doyle. It seemed to add up, but one question bothered the officers. If Doyle said his partner arrived at the complex around 2 a.m., and Sellers claimed it was 3:30 a.m., then who was lying, and why? The lie meant one of the guards had something to hide. So, the detectives decided to hold a face-to-face confrontation to identify the discrepancies in the stories of both security personnel. Chuck Doyle and Bob Sellers were called in for questioning again, and the police clarified the time when the men went for breakfast. At first, both were adamant about their versions, but eventually, Chuck Doyle admitted he might have mixed up the time because he was exhausted and had fallen asleep on duty. Nevertheless, the police still viewed both guards with suspicion, so they were asked to provide their fingerprints and palm prints for comparison with the samples found in Savannah Anderson's apartment. Due to the odd inconsistencies in Doyle and Sellers' stories, the detectives were convinced that one of them might turn out to be the killer who took the young woman's life. At least, that was the case until the forensic analysis showed that the fingerprints from the crime scene didn't match either man. Suspicion was immediately lifted from them, and the investigators continued searching for the potential perpetrator. They looked into other men in Savannah's life and checked former convicts living in the area, but found no matches again. Experts compared over 100 fingerprints in total, and none of them were a match. The investigation continued for the next few months. Unfortunately, all possible leads were explored and ruled out. The Irvine Police Department shifted its focus to other urgent cases. Savannah Anderson's case was archived as unsolved and began to fade from memory. There was one theory in those years, but it could only be verified 17 years later. Detectives suspected that Savannah might have been a victim of a serial killer operating in Orange County, California, in the late 1970s. This criminal was suspected of killing 5 young women under 35 years old. He would break into victims' homes through an unlocked door or open window, force them into sexual acts, and then beat and strangle them. This was exactly what happened to Savannah. However, there were distinguishing features of the crime. The killer didn't wash any of his victims in the bathroom or adorn their bodies after death. The maniac made no effort to clean up the crime scene, so the police ultimately dismissed this theory. In 1996, this killer was finally identified as Gerald Parker and sentenced to death. Meanwhile, years passed without answers about who was responsible for Savannah Anderson's murder. Only 5 years after the crime, Sonny's case was reopened, and Detective Larry Montgomery of the Irvine Police Department was tasked with solving it. The authorities believed that a fresh perspective might uncover something overlooked by the original investigators. Montgomery's attention was immediately drawn to the 2 security guards, Chuck Doyle and Robert Sellers. Due to how strange and inconsistent their statements were, the detective decided to re-interview them to revisit the night Savannah Anderson was killed. Chuck Doyle told almost the same story as he had 5 years earlier. Detective Montgomery was particularly interested in two things. First, where was the second guard when his replacement arrived late and couldn't find Sellers anywhere? If he wasn't outside, Karen Stotzenberg was found dead in her apartment on May 14, 1979. If he wasn't outside, he must have been somewhere indoors. And second, why when Bob showed up, was he without his shirt? If you haven't finished your shift, it's foolish to take off your security uniform. Perhaps his shirt was stained with blood. Doyle himself hadn't thought about this question. But when the police asked him about it, he, too, began to have doubts. And Chuck also confirmed that the early breakfast situation was unusual. Sellers had never before suggested going somewhere together. They were colleagues, not friends. So why, on that particular night, did Sellers invite Doyle to breakfast? And was that the real reason he returned to the Woodbridge complex? Or did he have some hidden motive related to the deceased young woman? Doyle mentioned in his conversation with the detective that shortly before Savannah Anderson's death, Bob Sellers had made a comment about her. The man said the blonde from the ground floor was very attractive to him. He found her quite alluring. So after re-interviewing Chuck Doyle, his partner Bob Sellers once again looked like a real suspect. The problem was that his fingerprints didn't match the perpetrator's fingerprints found in Sonny's apartment. The initial investigation had confirmed this. Since everything else pointed to Sellers having some connection to the young woman's death, Detective Montgomery decided to send the samples to the lab for a second comparison. The chance that a mistake had been made earlier was slim. Nevertheless, it existed because the human factor always had to be considered. It was unlikely that the expert who conducted the fingerprint comparison in 1979 had misread them. Nevertheless, Detective Montgomery sent the samples for re-examination, and the forensic analyst who compared Bob Sellers' fingerprints with those of the suspected perpetrator made a shocking discovery. When experts lifted the fingerprints at the crime scene in Savannah Anderson's apartment in May 1979, they apparently used some chemical that caused the print to be inverted. And no one noticed, so it's no surprise that the fingerprint in the case didn't match any of the suspects. After discovering the error, the expert corrected it and conducted a comparative analysis, and the analysis showed a match. A match with the fingerprints of one of the residential complex's security guards. Detective Montgomery was right. The initial comparison was the result of human error. To further confirm his conviction, the investigator sent the fingerprints to the FBI for analysis. And of course, they were able to identify 24 points of contact between the bloody fingerprint from the crime scene and Bob Sellers' fingerprint. This man was responsible for Savannah Anderson's tragic death. All this time, the perpetrator had been right in front of the police's eyes. But only in early 1984, nearly 5 years later, did the detectives finally realize their mistake and obtain evidence that allowed them to arrest the 27-year-old security guard. Robert Sellers was taken into custody on March 29, 1984. The police presented him with the evidence. But despite everything, Bob continued to deny that he had entered the ground floor apartment on the night of the crime. But he apparently quickly realized that his words meant nothing against physical evidence, and there was no point in denying his guilt. In the end, the guard confessed. However, with each subsequent interrogation, Sellers changed his story about the night he killed Savannah Anderson. According to court documents, Robert initially claimed that Sonny had invited him to her apartment on the evening of May 13th for a drink. Once he was inside, the young woman began flirting with him and pulling him toward the bedroom. He got aroused immediately, as he had long been attracted to Savannah. They started kissing and caressing each other, but then the young woman suddenly got angry for some reason and pointed him to the door. Bob said she grabbed him by the crotch and started pushing him out of the bedroom. Since this caused him pain, he pulled out the baton he carried as a weapon and began beating Savannah. The guard tried to portray his crime against the defenseless young woman as an act of self-defense. If Savannah hadn't harmed him first, he wouldn't have beaten her to a pulp. In another interrogation, Sellers changed his story again. According to him, he and Savannah had engaged in sexual intercourse. Something upset her, and she grabbed him by the testicles. He pulled out the baton and started hitting her. When the arrested man finally realized that the detectives didn't believe his self-defense story and that he couldn't escape punishment, he gathered his thoughts and told the police what really happened that night. Even before Sellers' confession, the police had established that he was literally obsessed with Savannah Anderson. The young woman had moved into the Woodbridge residential complex about 6 weeks before her tragic death. Concurrent with this, as soon as Bob saw Sonny, he fell in love almost instantly. The moment Anderson showed politeness and greeted the guard a couple of times, he decided she should belong to him. Late in the evening on May 13, 1979, while Bob Sellers was working as a security guard at the residential complex, he watched Savannah through the window of her ground-floor apartment. The man saw the young woman talking on the phone. He also realized she was home alone, so he decided to secretly climb through the unlocked bedroom window. So, Savannah never invited Bob over, as he initially claimed. The guard entered through the window and hid in the room while Sonny was still talking on the phone with her mother. When, a few minutes after midnight, she hung up and went to bed, she discovered Robert Sellers in her bedroom. The young woman was horrified. She knew this man worked as a security guard at the complex, but she understood that he was now in her apartment illegally. Sonny was so scared that she started yelling at Bob, asking what he was doing in her bedroom in the middle of the night. Sellers began making excuses, saying he just wanted to see Savannah and couldn't resist. The man tried to calm the young woman, but she continued to panic. Sonny was crying and screaming at the same time. Then Bob himself began to fear that her screams would attract the neighbors' attention and he could get into trouble. Sellers decided he needed to quiet Savannah somehow. He tried to cover her mouth, and a violent struggle ensued. Sonny had been stubborn since childhood and wasn't about to give up. Then Bob pulled out his guard's baton and began hitting the young woman on the head, then wrapped a belt around her neck and squeezed with all his strength until Sonny fell silent. At some point, Robert lost track of time. He was snapped back to reality by the sound of a car pulling into the residential complex. Sellers realized his partner Chuck Doyle had arrived for his shift. The perpetrator knew he needed to meet Doyle as soon as possible to avoid arousing suspicion. So, he took off his blood-soaked uniform shirt, left her apartment, and approached Chuck's car, after throwing the dirty clothes into his own vehicle parked in the lot. Sellers handed his partner the daily security report and tried to act normal. Doyle noticed Bob's strange appearance, but didn't think much of it, as he didn't see that his colleague's shirt and baton were covered in blood. After a brief conversation with Chuck, Robert got into his car and drove home to shower. Around 1:30 a.m., he decided to return to Savannah's apartment to clean up the traces of his crime, as he hadn't had time to do so immediately after killing the young woman in his rush to meet Doyle. When Sellers arrived at the complex, the other guard was peacefully asleep in his car, so Bob entered the ground-floor apartment without issue. He dragged Savannah's body off the bed, carried it to the bathroom, and began washing off the blood, then changed the blood-soaked bedsheet and placed the young woman's clean body back on the bed. He covered his victim's head with a towel because her face was badly beaten, and he didn't want to look at it in that state, and he covered her bruised neck with a necklace from Sonny's jewelry box. After all these preparations, Sellers climbed onto the bed and, as he put it, made love. That was the sole reason he committed the crime. This man wanted so badly to fulfill his secret fantasies that he was willing to take the life of a young woman just to achieve his desire. As soon as Bob desecrated Savannah's body, he left the apartment again, hoping to quietly return to his car and escape the crime scene unnoticed. But this plan failed because Chuck Doyle woke up at the exact moment Bob slammed his car door. Realizing this, Sellers panicked. He knew he had to quickly come up with a reason for why he had returned to the complex, so he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. He suggested having breakfast together at a local 24-hour diner. Bob explained to his partner that he had to head to the Marine Corps base in a few hours anyway, so he decided not to sleep. The entire time at breakfast, Robert tried to act as if nothing had happened, chatting about trivial matters and stalling for time. Over the next 5 years, he continued living his normal life. He married his high school sweetheart, and they had a child. Sellers committed no further crimes in his life. After the incident with Savannah Anderson, he became a law-abiding citizen. To some extent, Bob felt invincible. He had gotten away with killing the young woman he dreamed of possessing. Despite all the suspicions, for some reason, his fingerprints didn't match those found in Sonny's apartment. Sellers considered this luck, and when he was called in for a second interrogation 5 years later, he thought he could fool the detectives again. Unfortunately, such an outcome for Savannah Anderson's case was entirely possible if Detective Montgomery hadn't sent the evidence for re-examination, and if the expert hadn't noticed the error. Everything happened as it was meant to. Justice finally prevailed. After his confession, Robert Sellers was charged with burglary, forcible sexual assault, and assault with a deadly outcome. But when the trial began, the guard decided to plead not guilty again, despite having already confessed in court. He didn't deny committing the crime, but Sellers' defense team argued that their client couldn't be held responsible for taking Savannah's life, because on the night of the killing, he was taking pills that affected his mental state. Additionally, he was sleep-deprived, which caused him to snap and lose control when he began beating Anderson. This was one of the most outrageous defense arguments, and of course, it didn't work. Bob Sellers was found guilty and initially sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Bob's lawyers filed an appeal and managed to have his sentence overturned. For a killer to receive life imprisonment without parole, there must be a so-called special circumstance. This circumstance was the forcible sexual assault, but the lawyers argued that Savannah Anderson was assaulted after her death, so it couldn't be considered forcible. The convicted man had engaged in sexual intercourse with a dead body, which couldn't be considered a special circumstance for sentencing. On these grounds, Robert Sellers' sentence was overturned. The prosecutors offered him a deal. If he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, they wouldn't seek the death penalty. Bob agreed, and instead of life imprisonment without parole, he was sentenced to 25 years to life. This meant he would be eligible for parole after 25 years. Robert Sellers remains in prison to this day. The tragic irony of this story is that the only reason Savannah Anderson moved to the Woodbridge residential complex was its round-the-clock security. She knew how dangerous it was for a young woman to live alone in a new city and wanted to protect herself. But just 6 weeks after moving in, Sonny's life was tragically cut short because the person hired to protect her peace decided to act on his dark fantasies. Savannah Anderson was only 22 years old when Sellers stole her future, robbing her of the chance to become the happy wife of her beloved. The young woman never got to see her wedding day because someone placed their desires above everything else. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. Hollywood, California, a city where American dreams are born. Mary Ellen didn't want to live in real time. She wanted to revel in a world of fantasies where everyone would bow before her. This woman's dream became a nightmare for her husband. Once upon a time, Mary Ellen was a femme fatale, but behind her attractive exterior lurked a greedy monster. Bob didn't know this, and he paid the price. In early December 1988, a small-time dealer of illegal substances named Jimmy Bernstein was preparing to carry out a job. His target was Bob Samuelson. Samuelson had built a successful career as a Hollywood cinematographer, but he was forced to play the lead role in the bizarre story of his own demise. The problem with Hollywood is that sometimes it's hard to distinguish fantasy from reality. Bob Samuelson worked on fantasies but lived in the real world. As an assistant cinematographer, Bob worked behind the scenes. For the past few weeks, he had been spending long hours on the set of Lethal Weapon 2. It's an irony he would never live to appreciate. Jimmy Bernstein was a rookie hitman who had never taken a life. He was hired for this job by Bob's wife, Mary Ellen. She dreamed of getting rid of her husband. Mary Ellen Samuelson was a truly wicked woman. She used everyone who crossed her path, and she did it for financial gain. Beauty is just an outer shell, and beneath it can hide a vile, malicious soul. How did a beautiful Hollywood lady turn into a harpy hunting her own husband? To understand this, let's go back in time. Robert Samuelson grew up in a small town in California, surrounded by fields and orange groves, where kids could safely play in the streets. Bob had dreams and talent. He loved photography, and all his friends believed that one day he would apply his talent to something truly important. The young man studied and began working as an assistant cinematographer on major projects. Movie stars loved Bob for his easygoing nature and hard work. Of course, apart from interacting with famous actors, Bob's job wasn't exactly easy. It involved long hours behind the camera, irregular work days, constant travel, and a crazy schedule. But Bob handled his duties excellently. Professionally, everything was going well for him. However, his job took a toll on his personal life. Not every woman was willing to tolerate his constant absence. Robert desperately wanted to settle down and start a family, though he had nearly given up on finding the right woman to be his wife. One day, the man met the girl of his dreams. In fact, they had known each other since high school, when boys of all ages dreamed of the beautiful Mary Ellen Gurnick. For Bob back then, she was an unattainable ideal. A single glance at her left him speechless. It's a pity Bob didn't see beyond her external beauty. Mary Ellen Gurnick was the prettiest girl in class. She shone in school plays and was the prom queen. After graduating high school, Mary Ellen set out on a path to fame. But she didn't get far. She appeared in a couple of commercials, but her slender legs didn't lead her to Hollywood. Instead, Mary Ellen, still a teenager, got married, divorced, and decades after high school, returned to her hometown as a single mother with a daughter named Nicole. That's when she met Bob Samuelson. Now Bob was surrounded by Hollywood's glow, and the once unattainable prom queen deigned to interact with him. At first, they seemed very happy, full of energy and enthusiasm. Soon, Mary Ellen played the lead role in her own movie called Wedding, tying the knot with Bob Samuelson in 1980. Before we go any further, please support my channel. Put a like on the video and write in the comments from which city and state you are watching me. Thank you. The young wife and her child moved into her husband's house. Bob adopted Nicole and always tried to be a caring, loving, and hard-working family man. He did everything to ensure his wife and daughter were happy and wanted for nothing. And Mary Ellen finally realized her long-held dream. She entered Hollywood's star-studded scene. The woman probably hoped for a glamorous life. But in reality, they lived in an ordinary house in the San Fernando Valley. Every morning, Bob got up and went to work. She had to take care of the house, cook dinner, and handle household chores. At some point, Mary Ellen got bored. Parties where she could shine were rare. Every morning, the woman struggled to wake up, drank her cappuccino, and felt miserable. She wasn't at the center of the celebrity universe. People knew her only as the wife of cinematographer Bob. Her husband's adoring gaze didn't make her life any sweeter. What happens when your dreams of paradise crash into the ground? There's always a choice: accept it or take action. Mary Ellen chose to act. She began buying provocative outfits, attending various parties, and meeting shady characters. Bob knew his wife was cheating on him. They separated several times because of this, but Mary Ellen always found a way to win her husband back. When friends hinted to Bob that he needed to rethink his marriage, he didn't listen. The man was willing to do anything to preserve his relationship with his beloved. He wasn't the type to give up at the first sign of trouble. Realizing that Mary Ellen was dying of boredom while he was away at work all day, Bob came up with an activity for her. He bought a small sandwich shop and made his wife the manager. He wanted to keep her occupied to save their marriage. But selling sandwiches in the San Fernando Valley wasn't Mary Ellen's dream. It was her nightmare. It took Bob Samuelson several years to realize he had a slight problem with perceiving reality. The school's most beautiful girl, whom every guy dreamed of, was now his wife. Bob loved Mary Ellen dearly, but she wasn't the person he had fantasized about in high school. Life had changed her significantly. Most likely, Mary Ellen married Samuelson for his money and bright prospects. The woman's childhood couldn't be called happy. Becoming Bob's wife, she got a taste of the good life. For 4 years, Mary Ellen tried to play the role of a caring spouse, but then she grew tired of it. Among her acquaintances, Samuelson was the only decent man with family values and a steady job. Most of the people Mary Ellen associated with either sold illegal substances or used them. The sandwich shop, meant to provide the woman with income and entertainment, didn't meet her expectations. As soon as Bob left for a shoot, the shop was inevitably robbed, with all the earnings taken. Samuelson even bought his wife a special safe, but Mary Ellen kept leaving the money in the cash register. In reality, she was the one playing the role of the robber. By associating with shady characters, the woman became addicted to white powder, which consumed all her money. Let's not forget that Mary Ellen had a daughter. By the time her mother went off the deep end, Nicole was already a teenager. The schoolgirl grew up surrounded by lies and manipulation. She quickly learned how to manipulate men and young guys, guided by her own mother. Nicole Samuelson was an attractive 16-year-old girl. She learned early on to dress provocatively and frequent bars. She and Mary Ellen were like twins. Once, the mother and daughter showed up at a wedding ceremony their family was invited to, wearing matching skin-tight leather jumpsuits, looking like two Catwomen. To say it was inappropriate would be an understatement. They just loved being the center of attention. Most of the time, Mary Ellen hung out with Nicole's friends. They partied together in clubs, drank, and smoked weed. It didn't bother the woman that the girls were underage. She dressed to show off everything she could, wearing miniskirts, high heels, and revealing tops. Bob Samuelson paid for all these indulgences. In truth, he wasn't so much concerned about the money. He was more worried about Nicole, whom he always treated as his own daughter. Bob was upset that Mary Ellen wasn't the best mother and had a negative influence on the girl. Finally, in 1986, Bob admitted to himself that their marriage was doomed. After 6 years of marriage and heated arguments, Mary Ellen moved into a rented apartment, taking Nicole with her. Bob was devastated, while his wife simply enjoyed life, as Samuelson continued to pay all her bills. After the separation, he supported Mary Ellen and her lifestyle, and her demands were substantial. Bob's heart was breaking, and his wallet was bursting at the seams. Mary Ellen spent money on her pleasures: clothes, jewelry, trips, white powder. This went on for a couple of years. Deep down, Bob fantasized that one day, the woman of his dreams would come to her senses and return. Mary Ellen knew what her ex-husband wanted, but had no intention of becoming someone she never was for his sake. The winter holidays of 1988 were not the best time for Bob. He was preparing to spend Christmas alone in an empty house. That year, something shifted in Samuelson's mind. In the fall, when Bob turned 40, he decided it was time to move on, and he seriously considered divorce. Although Mary Ellen and Bob had been living separately for 2 years, they were still officially married. Mary Ellen did the math and quickly realized that a divorce would be a disaster for her. Like in a Hollywood movie, becoming a widow was a far more advantageous option. The woman had long been searching for someone to take responsibility and rid her of her tiresome husband. With divorce looming, Mary Ellen grew desperate to find an executor willing to help her gain access to her husband's money. She spoke so often and so much about hating her husband that no one took her words seriously anymore. There were a couple of people who agreed to eliminate Bob. They discussed various methods of disposal with the future widow, from an attack to staging an accident. Then they took the money and disappeared. It was immediately clear what kind of people Mary Ellen associated with. The woman believed no one took on the job because she was no longer young and not as beautiful as in her youth. To inspire a man to commit a crime, it took not only money but also feminine charm. Since Mary Ellen was inseparable from her daughter, she decided to involve her in solving the problem. She used her 16-year-old daughter to find a hitman, drawing Nicole into this sinister plot. But even that didn't work right away. They were lucky that Mary Ellen had a knack for spotting vulnerable and weak-willed men. Hollywood is a city where it's every man for himself. If you don't become a star, you're nobody, like Jimmy Bernstein, a slippery, unscrupulous con man. Thanks to Mary Ellen, he could become a star in a game called Take Someone's Life. James Bernstein, a tall, heavy-set loner, deftly fell into the trap, becoming prey. He had no friends. He made a living selling illegal substances. Any normal mother would keep her underage daughter far away from such characters. But Mary Ellen could hardly be called a sane mother, as she personally pushed Nicole to start a romance with Bernstein. Of course, Jimmy was over the moon. Girls rarely paid attention to him, so he couldn't believe his luck and even proposed to Nicole, giving her a ring. For 16-year-old Nicole, it was nothing more than a game. At the time, she was dating 2 young men simultaneously, and each was ready to marry her. She simply switched engagement rings depending on who she was going out with. But Jimmy didn't know he was one of 2 potential fiancés. The guy was genuinely in love and considered Nicole his fiancée. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen seized every opportunity to tell her future son-in-law that Bob Samuelson was an evil, cruel man who had repeatedly harassed her young daughter. She complained that her ex-husband had abused Nicole when she was a child. And then, when the girl grew up, the man violated her. To back up her claims about her aggressive husband, Mary Ellen showed bruises on her neck and shoulders. She said Bob had attacked her during a meeting. In reality, she had simply undergone plastic surgery. The dim-witted Jimmy easily swallowed the bait. His anger and hatred toward Bob Samuelson grew with each passing day. That's exactly what the mother and daughter were aiming for. They nurtured this feeling in the guy and wanted Bernstein to desire to send Bob to the afterlife himself. It was part of their brilliant manipulation. Jimmy truly believed that the girl he loved had been abused by her evil stepfather. Now, Mary Ellen had her own hitman. In reality, Robert Samuelson was never a cruel husband, despite the fact that his wife and daughter did everything possible to tarnish his reputation and make others believe in his deception. And it worked, because in the end, closer to the holidays, Jimmy Bernstein was consumed by an overwhelming desire to protect his beloved. It was the perfect moment for Mary Ellen, who learned that Bob was planning to file for divorce. The woman even slipped Jimmy $1,500 in cash to keep his enthusiasm alive and ensure he carried out the mission entrusted to him. Bob Samuelson occasionally saw Mary Ellen and Nicole. He even had a premonition that something bad was about to happen. Once, the man told his loved ones that he had lived a wonderful life and had done everything he wanted. But now, Bob was determined, saying he would divorce Mary Ellen and put an end to their marriage. At the time, no one understood the meaning of his strange premonitions. This became clear a little later. Mary Ellen was also ready to see her plan through to the end. She was a good actress when, in the dim light of the seedy bars of the San Fernando Valley, she played the role of an aggrieved and caring mother. And she managed to deceive Jimmy Bernstein, who in turn hired a friend who ultimately took up the weapon. On December 7th, 1988, Bob returned from work and took a shower. The man stepped out of the bathroom when he was attacked. First, he was struck on the head. The blow from the butt of a shotgun was devastating, but Bob stayed alive. He only fell to the floor, losing consciousness. Then they placed a pillow over his head and fired. Robert Samuelson was 40 years and 2 months old, when his life abruptly ended. It's unknown who pulled the trigger. Was it Jimmy Bernstein, or was it the friend he hired? Or did the guys carry out the attack together? The main thing is that Bob Samuelson was dead, and the grieving widow knew this perfectly well. The second part of Mary Ellen's plan was as follows. She left Bob a ton of messages on his answering machine, fully aware that he was no longer alive. This was supposed to serve as proof that she was not involved in her husband's death. Bob's lifeless body lay in the hallway for 2 whole days, while his ex-wife sent message after message to his phone. Only then did Mary Ellen and Nicole show up at the house. Bernstein had been instructed to make the attack look like a botched robbery, but he botched it. After the shooting, the perpetrator simply fled. The mother and daughter decided to take matters into their own hands. They pulled out drawers, overturned furniture, and even pried open the front door with a crowbar to make it look like unknown intruders had broken in. Only then, satisfied with her work, did Mary Ellen finally call 911 and report that she hadn't been able to reach her husband for several days. When she came to his house, she found him dead in the hallway. The police initially took her story at face value and began searching for the culprit. However, from the very beginning, everything looked suspicious. The attack was clearly carried out by an amateur. Detectives immediately realized there had been no burglary. It was all staged on purpose. When Mary Ellen executed her plan, she forgot to take anything valuable, and investigators noticed such details right away. At the police station, Mary Ellen continued to play the role of a grief-stricken widow. To make the detectives treat her leniently and avoid asking uncomfortable questions, the woman added a bit of flirtation to her behavior, which only heightened the officers' suspicion toward her. The police didn't buy Mary Ellen's act. They sensed that the woman had something to do with what happened to Bob Samuelson. But to prove it, they needed evidence, which, unfortunately, they didn't have. Mary Ellen walked away scot-free and continued to pose as a grieving widow. Everyone around could see how little she actually cared about her husband's death. The woman was far more concerned about what to wear to the funeral. In the end, she showed up at the church in a new, tight-fitting black dress with an open back, earning disapproval from Bob's family. The widow behaved as if it were a party, not a time for mourning. Now that Bob was 6 feet under, Mary Ellen's life drastically improved. She inherited everything he had worked for throughout his life. The widow received a tidy sum of $250,000 from Bob's insurance company and moved into his house. Instead of cleaning the carpets where the body had lain, she and Nicole simply threw another rug over the top to cover the brown stains and went on living as if nothing had happened. Once the main business was settled, Mary Ellen got down to the real task, mourning her husband's death. The widow found solace in a new Porsche, grieved in the fitting rooms of high-end stores, and wiped her tears with lace napkins. Then, Mary Ellen threw a lavish birthday party, rented a limousine, invited guests, and bought herself a condo in Cancun as a gift. Finally, she could live the life she deemed worthy of herself. However, not everything was smooth sailing. Jimmy Bernstein, Nicole's fake fiancé, was going through tough times. At some point, he realized he had been used as a pawn. The young man saw the vibrant life Mary Ellen and Nicole were living, but he was no longer part of it. Perhaps guilt or resentment toward his fiancée for betraying him made him consider turning himself in. Jimmy hinted to those around him that he'd had enough and was going to the police to tell them everything. It seemed that Jimmy Bernstein was about to be the one to ruin Mary Ellen's perfect life. However, the widow had her own way of dealing with unwanted partners, and Jimmy instantly became her target. As mentioned earlier, Mary Ellen easily identified people she could manipulate. Usually, these were young, vulnerable guys with addictions to illegal substances. Paul Gall was one such guy. His financial situation left much to be desired, so he stood no chance against Mary Ellen, her money, and her cunning. The woman knew that Gall had lost his brother to addiction. Jimmy Bernstein was a dealer, which meant he was indirectly responsible for Gall's brother's death, and he definitely deserved to die. like all dealers distributing illegal substances. To cover her bases, Mary Ellen enlisted the support of another desperate girl and her boyfriend. The young couple also agreed to eliminate Jimmy Bernstein in exchange for settling a debt. For most women who lose their husbands, adjusting to life alone without their loved one is very difficult. Often, they need a little reset, to go somewhere, change the scenery, and distract themselves from grief. But some need to head to Cancun with a bag of money and indulge in a photo shoot with their new boyfriend. Some need to leave to find comfort and peace. Mary Ellen needed to establish an alibi because she had hired hitmen to take out the man she had tricked into killing her husband. By the way, during the photo shoot in the hotel room, the widow decided to take one picture for fun. She stripped naked, covered her body with dollar bills, and smiled broadly. That photograph would later play a role in the widow's fate. Mary Ellen had already spent most of the money inherited after her husband Bob went to his grave 6 months earlier. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Jimmy Bernstein was about to follow Bob. Paul Gall and his friend Daryl Edwards were inexperienced hitmen, so before dealing with Bernstein, they calmed their nerves with a couple of beers. In reality, it was definitely more than a couple, as a drunken Paul could barely climb into the car kindly provided by Mary Ellen. In that same car, Jimmy was sitting in the front seat. The buddies had tricked him into joining them. They were supposedly going to steal illegal substances. The plan was to strangle Bernstein in the car, but unlike Bob Samuelson, he wasn't going to die. He tried to escape, but unfortunately, not fast enough. Paul grabbed him, struck him in the throat several times, and then simply squeezed his neck with his hands and strangled him. The buddies dumped the lifeless body in a ravine, taking his ID and tossing it along the way, then returned home and continued partying. It took a month to find Jimmy's body. When investigators searched his home, they found some documents linking him to the killing of Bob Samuelson. They also found a life insurance policy for $25,000, which Bernstein had taken out the day after Bob's death. The guy had named his fiancée, Nicole, as the sole beneficiary, who soon after dumped him. Jimmy turned out to be yet another deceived man unable to distinguish his fantasies from reality. A detective summoned Mary Ellen for questioning. The woman admitted that she had once met a young man named Jimmy Bernstein in a bar and complained to him about her husband. She had no idea she had driven the guy to commit a crime against Bob. The widow suggested that he had simply fallen in love with her daughter and wanted to punish the evil stepfather. A breakthrough in the case came when the police began questioning Jimmy's acquaintances. Among them was Paul Gall's neighbor, and the girl spilled the whole story because Paul, while drunk, had let it slip. When it dawned on Gall that he could easily end up in the gas chamber for killing Jimmy Bernstein, the guy didn't hesitate to trade Mary Ellen's freedom for his own life. The woman, who had recently gotten away with 2 crimes, sat before the detective, trying every trick to lie her way out. But her ploys and manipulations didn't work on the officer. After informing her of the charges and reading her rights, the officers arrested Mary Ellen and sent her behind bars. She never thought something like this could happen to her and was completely unprepared for such a turn of events. At the trial, Mary Ellen tried to portray a desperate widow who had been insulted in the most horrific way. In her opinion, the police were to blame for everything. Officers had asked her out on dates, but she refused them. After that, Mary Ellen was accused of every mortal sin as they sought revenge for their wounded pride. Apparently, the woman still felt like the femme fatale who drove high school boys crazy. However, her performance looked ridiculous, especially compared to the prosecution's evidence. The defense brought in Mary Ellen's elderly parents as witnesses. They were very ill and frail. It was heart-wrenching to watch elderly people beg the jury to spare their daughter's life. They spoke about her unhappy childhood. At the same time, the parents knew nothing about the Cancun condo or the new Porsche. The old couple lived on a meager pension, about 2 hours' drive from the San Fernando Valley. In the year of her luxurious lifestyle, their daughter had visited her mother and father only once. The photograph of Mary Ellen posing naked covered only with dollar bills, became key evidence of her motives and quickly spread through the media. The picture clearly showed who Mary Ellen was. Thanks to the photo, the media dubbed her the Green Widow, and that snapshot helped land the woman in California's most exclusive club, the Death Chamber. Finally, the widow would get to mingle with people who would appreciate all her talents. Mary Ellen Samuelson could have lived a good life in the real world, but she chose a different path, to live in a world of her own fantasies, where everyone would bow before her. Paul Gall testified against Mary Ellen in court. He had already served his sentence and was released on parole. His friend Darrell Edwards remained behind bars until the end of his term. Mary Ellen's daughter, Nicole Samuelson, was not charged. She changed her name, had children of her own, and refuses to recall her past. Robert Samuelson is buried in his hometown. He was a good, hard-working guy, but became the target of a criminal conspiracy and suffered only because he loved too deeply. And Mary Ellen got what she always dreamed of, the starring role in a great theatrical performance. The ending didn't match her vision, but not all fantasies become reality. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. Two young women were sitting at a table in a cafe, peacefully chatting. At least, that's how it appeared from the outside. In reality, their conversation went far beyond ordinary small talk. One of the friends was older, her face distorted by barely concealed anger and hatred. Because she was clearly nervous, her hair was disheveled and looked unkempt. At one point, she pulled a baseball bat from under the table and showed it to her companion, explaining how it could be used in action. Then her face lit up, and an equally absurd idea came to her. They should take a large dose of a psychotropic substance, fill a syringe, and inject it straight into the heart. The other girl's eyes widened, but she was willing to do almost anything to gain the favor of the woman she looked up to, and $500 wouldn't hurt either. Despite the utter foolishness of the two friends' discussion, that conversation in the cafe had serious consequences. One person lost their life, and 3 others ended up in prison. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. In 2015, Kendra Hatcher turned 35. She was born and raised in the small village of Pleasant Plains, Illinois, where she was brought up with strong Christian values. Pleasant Plains is located just 24 minutes northwest of Springfield, with a population of about 800. In high school, Kendra was heavily involved in sports, serving as the captain of the cheerleading squad and the women's volleyball team. Although Kendra looked like the protagonist of a Hollywood movie, she was beautiful, not only on the outside, but also on the inside. She did everything she could to help her community, leading Bible study classes for children from disadvantaged families and even traveling abroad to help build churches. After graduating high school, small-town graduates typically chose one of 2 paths. Some stayed where they were born, got jobs, started families, and had children, while others sought to step out of their comfort zone, moved to big cities, attended college, and tried to build a life different from that of their parents. Kendra definitely belonged to the second group. She wanted to achieve great things in the field of medicine, so after finishing high school, she left her hometown and enrolled at a university in Greencastle, Indiana. During spring break in college, Kendra didn't party on the beach like most of her peers. She spent all her free time working with Habitat for Humanity. This international nonprofit organization focused primarily on building simple and affordable housing for the poor and homeless around the world. After graduating college with a major in Spanish and a minor in biochemistry, Kendra enrolled in the University of Kentucky's dental school. There, she met a young man, and after completing her studies, she married him. As often happens, young love fades quickly when real life begins outside the campus. At some point, Kendra and her husband realized they had completely different goals in life, and neither was willing to compromise. The couple parted ways amicably, each going their separate way. Kendra Hatcher always loved working with children, so it came as no surprise when she took a job in pediatric dentistry. Even during Christmas breaks in college, she had traveled to Ecuador to provide free dental care to local children. Now, Kendra chose a job that brought her joy and filled her with positive emotions. Interacting with children never left her indifferent. When talking on the phone with her family, the young woman often shared stories about her little patients. In 2015, Kendra Hatcher lived in Dallas, Texas, where she made many friends. Together, they attended concerts, sports games, visited museums, spent time in bars, or simply held casual gatherings over coffee. Kendra worked as a pediatric dentist at a company that provided high-quality dental care to children from disadvantaged families. It was the perfect place where she could work with kids, help those in need, and earn a decent salary. Kendra moved into a residential complex in downtown Dallas, which had its own pool and gym, with stunning views of the city from the windows. She was quite content with her life. The only thing she truly lacked was a partner, a soulmate. It was clear that Hatcher could take care of herself financially, but she longed for someone close to share both joys and sorrows. Kendra never lacked suitors, but she wasn't interested in fleeting relationships. Many men showed her attention and tried to get acquainted, but Hatcher was never truly interested in any of them. The young woman occasionally went on dates, but further communication rarely followed. One meeting was enough for her to realize that a man wasn't the hero of her story. Kendra knew what she wanted and wasn't about to lower her standards. Having experienced a failed marriage in her youth, Hatcher wasn't in a rush to tie her life to the first person she met and didn't want to repeat the same mistake. In 2012, a famous online dating app appeared. Like most single people, Kendra was intrigued by the idea of online communication. She created an account and began browsing photos of men looking for their other half. She scrolled through countless photos and read dozens of bios. Some candidates seemed insincere or uninteresting to her. The beliefs and values of others were far from her outlook on life. She had almost given up hope when one day she stumbled upon the profile of a man named Ricardo Paniagua. In his bio, Ricky shared that he was living out his childhood dream of becoming a doctor and was looking for a woman who understood what it meant to have a busy schedule. He worked as a dermatologist and was an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Like Hatcher, this man devoted much of his time to helping others, enjoyed sports, and lived life to the fullest. Kendra and Ricky connected, and the attraction was mutual. They started chatting through the app, then exchanged phone numbers, and soon began planning their first date. On May 24, 2015, Hatcher and Paniagua met in real life for the first time. Kendra immediately realized that Ricky was unlike any of her previous suitors, and he, in turn, saw in his new acquaintance a woman he could envision a long-term future with. From that moment, things moved very, very quickly. The couple's beliefs and interests were aligned. Ricky, too, had been married before, so he wasn't in a hurry to commit to just anyone. The young couple spent all their free time together, arranging unique dates for each other, going on romantic weekend getaways, and just 3 months after meeting, actively discussing their plans for the future. The holidays were approaching, and the couple planned to visit Kendra's relatives in Illinois, where her family eagerly awaited meeting the man she had told them so much about. Her loved ones saw how Kendra's eyes sparkled when she spoke of her partner and dreamed of finally meeting him. Though no official proposal had yet been made, the couple was already planning a wedding, discussing the budget for the event and ironing out details. They even started saving money for the upcoming ceremony. A romantic vacation was planned in the beautiful, picturesque resort town of Cancun, Mexico, where Ricky was likely planning to propose. In short, everything was going wonderfully and would likely have ended in a lavish wedding if not for a tragedy. On September 2nd, 2015, a Wednesday, Kendra spent the entire day at work. After finishing her shift at 7:42 p.m., she drove into the underground parking garage of her residential complex, and just a few minutes later, a deafening scream and several gunshots echoed through the garage. At that moment, besides Hatcher, another resident, a young man named Hashim, was in the parking garage. He heard the shots and saw a Jeep Cherokee speeding out of the garage. Someone was clearly in a hurry to flee the scene. Hashim got into his car and headed toward the exit, looking around and trying to spot the victim. Then, near one of the cars, he saw a woman lying on the ground. Hashim immediately called 911 and reported the shooting in the parking garage. Emergency services arrived quickly, but unfortunately, it was already too late. The victim Hashim had noticed died almost instantly. It was 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher, a successful pediatric dentist. The police's initial theory was a failed robbery that ended in a fatal outcome. It wasn't necessary to know the victim personally to guess her financial status. The residential complex was home to fairly affluent people. The entire garage was immediately cordoned off, and detectives began collecting evidence. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground. Kendra's cell phone lay near her body, but her purse was nowhere to be found. The longer the police examined the crime scene, the more they doubted the initial theory and became convinced that Hatcher hadn't been chosen as a victim by chance. The woman had been shot execution style. She was wounded in the back and the upper part of her head. The bullet exited through her chin. Judging by the gunpowder residue, her hands were raised and held behind her head when she was shot. The crime was deeply personal, making it almost unbelievable. Everyone who knew Kendra said it was hard to find a kinder, more compassionate person, always ready to drop everything and help. Hatcher worked with children, and there wasn't the slightest chance that a pediatric dentist could have made enemies. For the victim's loved ones, her tragic death was an absolute shock. News of Hatcher's death began appearing in newspaper headlines and on broadcasts across the country on the night of September 3rd. When one of her friends was told that Kendra had passed away, she couldn't believe it. The woman frantically dialed her number, praying that Hatcher would pick up and say it was some terrible mistake. But the call kept going to voicemail. Another friend, upon hearing the news, rushed to Kendra's home. When no one answered the door, she simply sat on the floor and sobbed. Hatcher's death broke the hearts of many who surrounded her. Fortunately, the parking garage was equipped with surveillance cameras. They captured the aforementioned black Jeep Cherokee entering the garage at 7:15 p.m., about 30 minutes before Kendra returned home from work. This further supported the theory that the perpetrator was waiting for a specific victim. When Hatcher got out of her car, the shooter approached her. After pulling the trigger several times, he grabbed the victim's purse and jumped back into the Jeep in the passenger seat. Then the black vehicle sped out of the underground parking garage. Most interestingly, someone else was driving. So, the criminal didn't act alone. Moreover, judging by the surveillance footage, a woman was in the driver's seat. Due to the poor quality of the recording, investigators couldn't immediately identify the person, so they appealed to the public, asking anyone who recognized the vehicle or its passengers to contact the police. The news broadcasted the surveillance footage from the underground garage. The media went wild. Upon learning that a successful female dentist had been brutally killed in the parking garage of an upscale building, the story spread like wildfire across Dallas. Almost the next day, the police received a phone call. A man named Jose Ortiz was very nervous as he told the operator that the vehicle in the surveillance footage belonged to him. Jose quickly assured the dispatcher that he had nothing to do with what happened in the garage. He had lent the car to a friend, never imagining he'd see it on the local news in connection with a brutal murder. Most interestingly, this friend, more accurately, a female friend, was sitting in a restaurant with the Jeep's owner at the time of the crime, so the caller, as expected, was utterly confused. Investigators learned that the friend Jose had lent his Jeep to was named Brenda Delgado. When Ortiz asked the woman how his car ended up on the surveillance cameras in the residential complex's parking garage, Brenda tried to dodge the question and lie, saying he was mistaken. But after persistent questioning, she gave in and admitted she had lent the Jeep to her friend because she didn't have a car. According to Delgado, her acquaintance was involved in selling illegal substances. This information did nothing to reassure Jose. Learning that his Jeep might have been used in a drug deal, the young man panicked and immediately decided to call the police. However, Brenda didn't like this idea at all. She got angry and tried to scare her friend, saying he could be deported if he contacted the cops. Instead, she suggested repainting the car a different color so it couldn't be traced. This seemed more than suspicious. The police considered Jose's tip credible, and detectives decided to speak with Brenda Delgado directly. During the interrogation, the woman went out of her way to appear helpful. She explained that she had never heard of Kendra Hatcher before and had never seen her. At the time of the crime, Brenda was at a small restaurant with her friend Jose. She even had a receipt, which she promptly showed the officers. As for the Jeep, Delgado had let her acquaintance, Crystal Cortez, use it. So now the police had the names of Brenda, who had initially asked Jose to lend her the car, and Crystal, who had borrowed the vehicle from Delgado. Jose and Brenda had an alibi. They were at the restaurant at the exact time the attack occurred. So, the next person of interest in the case was, of course, Crystal Cortez. The girl was only 23 years old, while her friend Brenda was 31. Crystal immediately confessed that she was indeed driving the Jeep that evening and told the detectives the following story. According to Cortez, she was driving with her young son. When she stopped and was about to get out, an unknown man climbed into the car and, threatening her with a gun, forced her to drive him to a residential apartment complex. Crystal was worried about her child, so she did everything the assailant ordered. She even heard the man shoot someone in the parking garage but was too scared to turn her head and look at the victim. Of course, the investigators understood how strange this story sounded. If we assume the mother was concerned for her son's safety, she wouldn't have sat and waited in the car for the assailant to return. She would have floored the gas pedal and sped away. The story didn't hold up to scrutiny, but the investigators didn't interrupt the storyteller. Meanwhile, Crystal kept talking. She told the officers that after the shots rang out, the hijacker returned to the Jeep and ordered her to drive him to the other side of Dallas, then simply got out of the car and disappeared into the trees. This sounded completely implausible. It's unlikely a criminal who had just committed a murder would let go of a woman who saw his face and could report him to the police. The police immediately began verifying Crystal's story. They reviewed the surveillance footage from different angles and discovered there was no child in the car at the time. Cortez was called in for another interrogation, where they pointed out that she was in the car alone with the criminal. When Crystal realized her lie had been exposed, she completely changed her story. This time, she admitted that the shooter hadn't threatened her and no one had hijacked the car. She said she had voluntarily driven the man to Kendra Hatcher's residential complex, but only knew he was planning to rob someone, not take a life. Cortez claimed she had no idea the shooter had a gun. The detectives asked Crystal why she had agreed to do something like that in the first place. It turned out the idea belonged to her friend Brenda. She had offered $500 just for Cortez to drive the Jeep and then help the robber escape. The girl insisted to the police that $500 was a lot of money for her because she was a single mother who needed to care for her young son. So who was Brenda Delgado, and what could have connected her to the deceased Kendra Hatcher? Brenda was born and raised in central Mexico before her family moved to Dallas, Texas. From childhood, the girl dreamed of achieving something greater in life. She saw how hard it was for her immigrant parents to support a large family. Her father worked in construction, and her mother cleaned other people's homes. Brenda wanted her parents to be proud of her, and at the same time wanted a more stable, prosperous life. After high school, Delgado enrolled in college, and finally decided she wanted to pursue dentistry. Since her parents couldn't afford to pay for her college education during breaks between classes, the girl worked 2 jobs, as a dental assistant and at a spa, providing teeth whitening services. This helped her pay for tuition and buy the necessary textbooks for her major. Brenda was also very religious and regularly attended church. In 2012, shortly after the dating app appeared, she met Ricky Paniagua online. and their relationship developed rapidly. 3 months after their first date, Brenda moved into the young man's luxurious apartment in Dallas. For the first time in a long while, she felt the taste of life. In June 2013, Delgado learned she was pregnant. However, after discussing the situation with her boyfriend, she decided to terminate the pregnancy. Though she agreed with her partner's reasoning, the procedure deeply affected her emotional state. Since Brenda hid the pregnancy from her friends and family, she had no one to share her feelings with. In notes on her phone, she described the emotions she experienced after visiting the clinic and wrote herself a motivational note that she and Ricky would still have children and everything would be wonderful. Gradually, her emotions settled and life returned to normal. That same year, Delgado enrolled in a dental hygiene school, and by early 2014, she was showing off a new engagement ring to her classmates. She and Ricky were discussing their future wedding, and their life together seemed perfect. But in July 2014, Brenda came to class sobbing uncontrollably. Several classmates asked what had happened. She told them that Ricky had suggested they break up and asked her to move out of the apartment. Brenda desperately clung to her dream that she and Paniagua would live happily ever after, get married, and one day have children. When the breakup happened, her dream shattered to pieces. Brenda was inconsolable. She stopped caring about her grades, skipped classes, and just a few weeks after the breakup with Ricky, she completely dropped out of the program. The girl set a goal to win back her boyfriend at all costs. Over the next few months, Brenda managed to restore her relationship with Ricky, though they now lived separately, and they were still considered a couple. The young man even paid some of Delgado's monthly bills, and occasionally, they started talking about marriage again. The couple fully reconciled, but the next breakup happened as quickly as they had gotten back together. In February 2015, Ricky broke up with Brenda, suggesting they remain just friends. Brenda agreed, but couldn't understand why she had been dumped, or what made other women better. At some point, her resentment toward her ex-boyfriend turned into an obsession. She had access to his email and app passwords, so she saw every message and email Ricky ever sent to other women. Additionally, Brenda had installed a program that allowed her to track her ex's location. So, wherever he was, the girl would show up unexpectedly, as if by chance, attributing it to fate. It might have been fine if, in May 2015, Ricky hadn't texted Brenda that he had met the girl of his dreams, and things were serious. Delgado's obsession reached an entirely new level, as if she finally realized she had little chance of winning back her ex-boyfriend. Although Ricky didn't mention the name of his new partner, with access to his messages, Brenda quickly tracked down Kendra Hatcher. Delgado saw every message between the lovers, and it filled her with absolute rage. She meticulously documented Paniagua's new relationship, taking screenshots of text messages and flight bookings. Then she found her rival's social media profile and saw that Kendra was undeniably in love with Ricky. Hatcher constantly posted their joint photos, writing about lavish dates and romantic out-of-town trips. Every post where Kendra shared her newfound happiness with loved ones, family, and friends was like pouring fuel on the fire burning inside Brenda. Soon, this obsession with her ex consumed Delgado entirely. She couldn't control herself. All her conversations revolved around Ricky and his new girlfriend. Even on dates with other guys, the topic didn't change. She started staking out Kendra's home to see her rival in person. Then she began looking for someone who could harm Hatcher. What started as a simple desire to scare her soon turned into a thirst for blood. And who among her acquaintances could have imagined that Brenda was seriously offering them the role of a hitman? In mid-August, a few weeks before the attack on Kendra, Delgado was determined to take her rival's life. She needed to find an accomplice to deflect suspicion from herself. That's how Crystal Cortez got dragged into the scheme. Crystal met Brenda through mutual friends. She lived with her son at her grandparents' house and was desperately in need of money. $500 for such a job seemed like a huge sum to the single mother. and she easily agreed to participate in the attack on an innocent woman. Crystal's claims to investigators that she didn't know about the planned assassination were a blatant lie. She fully understood what she was getting into and was now just trying to wriggle out of it. But money wasn't the only reason Cortez took part in the attack on Kendra Hatcher. Delgado was a sort of idol for Crystal. The girl wanted to emulate her in everything. She admired Brenda's style and demeanor and sought to earn her approval. Just a couple of weeks after meeting, Brenda and Crystal were plotting together how best to take the life of Ricky's new girlfriend. They sat in a cafe, discussing various methods of attack. The girls followed Hatcher's apartment for days, studying her daily routine and habits. They knew the lovers were planning to go to Mexico for the weekend, and that trip could shatter Delgado's hopes for good. Meanwhile, Kendra lived her normal life, completely unaware that two people were tracking her every move and choosing the date of her death. The happy young woman was preparing to spend the weekend with her beloved. So the girls settled on a method of execution. They decided shooting Kendra would be the best option. The problem was that neither of them knew how to handle a gun, let alone shoot and not miss. Brenda and Crystal decided to hire a hitman for a small sum of cash. Since they didn't know any guys willing to commit a crime, they decided to approach a stranger. The two conspirators went to a poor neighborhood in the city and began asking men if they were willing to shoot someone for a reward. Naturally, most men with common sense didn't take the strange offer from the girls approaching them on the street seriously. Brenda and Crystal were nearly out of hope when they came across a 31-year-old guy named Christopher Love. As it turned out, Christopher had a rather shady reputation and made a living selling weed. Starting in his early teens, the young man had repeatedly come to the police's attention for robbery, burglary, and assault. To get Christopher to agree, Brenda, without much thought, lied to him, saying she had come from Mexico, where she had close ties to the mafia. In exchange for eliminating Kendra Hatcher, she promised to pay him cash and provide weed worth a total of $3,000. And Christopher agreed. He said he already had a gun, and they didn't need to worry about anything. On August 26th, Brenda finally completed her dental hygiene course. Her family and friends were proud that she had finally achieved her dreams. Even Ricky texted her during her final exams, wishing her luck. Perhaps he was trying to soften their breakup and be friendly. But to Delgado, it felt like her ex was simply mocking her. Then, Ricky sent her another message that drove the girl to complete despair. Paniagua said things with Kendra were very serious and that he had gotten a job in California where he planned to move with his fiancée. The young man wanted to say goodbye to Brenda as a friend, but in reality, that message sealed Hatcher's fate. Brenda and Crystal worked out the final details. Initially, they wanted to borrow a silver BMW from one of Delgado's friends, but at the last moment, the car wouldn't start. Jose, unaware of what the vehicle was needed for, selflessly offered to lend his Jeep. Brenda went with Jose to a restaurant to establish an alibi. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love went to carry out the deed. Since the girl herself admitted she was the driver who fled the crime scene, she was arrested. However, despite Brenda Delgado orchestrating the assassination, the police didn't have enough grounds to detain her. Investigators worried that the suspect might flee, and the case would drag on for years. Checking Brenda's record for possible violations, officers came across an unpaid parking ticket. They used it to arrest Delgado, buying themselves extra time to search for incriminating evidence against her in the parking garage shooting investigation. When the media reported Brenda's arrest, her friends, family, and even Ricky Paniagua couldn't believe this young woman could be involved in anything. After the tragedy with Hatcher unfolded, Brenda went out of her way to support her ex-boyfriend. Most acquaintances considered Delgado a kind, God-fearing Christian. Her image didn't align with a contract killing. Law enforcement also detained Christopher Love, the man who pulled the trigger. During his arrest, they found a gun matching the one used to shoot Hatcher. However, when the police asked him about Kendra and showed him her photo, Love claimed he had never seen the woman and categorically denied any involvement in the attack. But the detectives didn't need his confession, as they had enough evidence against him. Besides the murder weapon, his DNA was found in the black Jeep Cherokee, corroborating Crystal's account. Meanwhile, Brenda posted bail for the unpaid parking ticket, boarded a bus, and fled the country. The FBI added Delgado to its list of the 10 most wanted fugitives. A $100,000 reward was offered for information about her whereabouts. A few months later, in April 2016, Brenda was caught. She was living in Torreon, Mexico. She was tracked down with the help of Mexican law enforcement. The only problem was that, under Mexican law, a suspect couldn't be extradited to the U.S. if they faced the death penalty. So, the authorities had to promise that the death penalty wouldn't be pursued against Delgado. To ensure Brenda didn't escape justice and face the law, the prosecutor had to enlist the help of her accomplice, Crystal Cortez. The woman was offered a deal: 35 years in prison in exchange for testimony against Delgado and Christopher Love. The young mother agreed to cooperate with the police without hesitation. For the first time, she thought about her son, who would have to grow up without a mother, and that was likely the smartest decision she made in this story. In October 2018, Cortez pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 35 years in prison in exchange for testifying against her accomplices. Christopher's trial took place in October 2018. It took the jury just 2 hours of deliberation to find the man guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Kendra's family was more than satisfied with his punishment. However, Love's defense team tried to have some jurors removed, alleging they discriminated against the defendant's rights, but the request was denied. Love's defense even launched a petition about the trial titled "Free Christopher Love, an innocent father sentenced to death by a racist jury." The website's description claimed Crystal was an unreliable witness who accused an honest man. Brenda's trial took place in June 2019. Many different witnesses testified, including Ricky Paniagua. His former girlfriend stared at him intensely and likely felt no remorse at that moment. Delgado was found guilty of a serious crime and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Kendra Hatcher was a wonderful person who could have done a lot of good in this world. Nature and her parents endowed the girl with not only an attractive appearance, but also a remarkable character. However, Delgado's blind jealousy and unwillingness to accept her ex-partner's choice destroyed the young woman's life. Brenda's senseless crime not only failed to win back her beloved, but also condemned her to spend her entire life behind bars. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.